even that this happens, we also know that we have great challenges in front of us in terms of energy, climate, and sustainability. And this is what this conference is about, which is the European Energy Research Alliance High-Level Policy Conference. And we have a lot of people which have signed up to this conference this year. I suppose there are more people now watching digital than what we have in the audience. But with that as a backdrop, and not the best backdrop, let's look at today, and I'll give you a short overview on what we are up to in my introductory speech. So, as I said, we are on the 15th year anniversary. I was also in ERA at the 10-year anniversary. And today we're launching 2 milestone reports, one on energy demand reduction and the other one on securing critical raw materials for the clean energy transition in Europe. And these are among the reports we are making on a regular basis. And I think these reports today, which we'll have more discussion about later today, is also very telling in terms of showing the need not just to think about continuous growth, but also about how we can reduce demand, and also how we can secure and home source the efforts going into the different technologies we need for the future. And not only the future, I'm now thinking about what's happening these days, actually. I think there are maybe people which are not muted online, but anyway. I don't know if there are any protests. Okay, ERA, so we've been around for 15 years. Our mission, you see it here, catalyzing European energy research to achieve a climate neutral society by 2050. And being the privileged energy research authority is our vision. And ERA, with its 18 joint programs, is assembling about 50,000 people in energy research through our partnership, which I think is unparalleled, not only in a European scale, but on a global scale. And through our 18 joint programs, which is the muscle and the practitioners of the energy research in Europe, you see all these important items, which is part of the energy and climate transition and revolution, going from materials to technologies towards the systems, and SSH also as an integral part of our activity. So a bit about the backdrop and what we are up to now. There is the COP28 waiting in Dubai. And as part of the COP28, there is also the global stocktake of emissions. And looking at this graph makes you wonder, because this is the historical emissions of greenhouse gases. So this is CO2 and F gases and land use change and forestry and so forth. And you see the solid black line is where the historical line. And you see the NDC, so the nationally determined contributions, where they are going to bring us. And you see in 2030, with those which are pledges today, we are really short of the targets, which are the blue line, which is the 2/3 possibility to reach 2 degrees, and the green line, which is the one we are all talking about, which is 1.5 degree with a 50% chance. I mean, putting the line there for 2/3 chance of being within 1.5 degree would just make a curve which is directly going to zero. So the gap towards the Paris Agreement is something like 24 gigatons. So quite a big challenge coming up for the COP28 in terms of how we're going to increase the nationally determined contributions, and how we're going to make this happen, not only by technologies, but also in ways of how we can capture, so to speak, growth and demand requests. And so it makes you think sometimes that nothing is possible. On the contrary, I will say that nothing is possible, meaning zero is possible. And we've seen from the IEA, the Net Zero Emission 2050 update, which came some weeks ago, showing a path. I mean, still there is an open path towards 1.5 degree, as it's said here, although with the caveats of 50% and so forth. But we need to take strong measures to make this happen. And you'll see in this curve that the peak will then have to shift, has to peak before 2025, and then a steadily decline in emissions. And what we see here as the key points, for instance, clean energy growth results in no need for new unabated coal power. However, this is happening, especially in Asia, where you have a new stock of coal generators, power generators, and no need for new oil and gas fields. This report also points towards the market mechanisms, saying that this is going to be driven by the market. So because the alternatives are cheaper, there is no need for new oil and gas. And you could argue, is the market going to fix this or not? Well, at least the statement is there, and it's reiterated this time, although it says long-term on the oil and gas. The global ambitions, the triple of renewables, the double the energy intensity, so the best kilowatt hours are those which are not used. Cut methane from fossil fuels, and this is broadly coming from fossil fuel extraction, and that all the heavy industries have to be near zero capable, so capture ready, so to speak. And also that the developed countries will have to reduce more earlier than the emerging economies to give some leeway for the development needed. And then in 2050, as a kind of dream situation, where we see that power generation is overwhelmingly renewable, nuclear capacity, nuclear will also be a part of this picture, and electrification being a key driver to this transition. And look at the annual removals as well. This is not a small number. So this is removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere or water. And also reflecting on if this curve is shifted to the right, if we are slower in terms of peaking, if we delay action, well, you need to remove more and more. So these 1.7 gigatons, they will just increase. And we know this is really the most expensive way of reducing emissions. So part of why we think this net zero is possible, is the growth of some of the key technologies. One here is shown as electric car sales. Over the 2 years since the last Net Zero Emission 2050 report, it's been a tremendous change in buying patterns. So in 2021, 1 out of 25 cars sold was electric. Now it's 1 out of 5. That's almost a vertical line there. And also you see for photovoltaics, huge growth, which is also very much needed. But still, is it enough? Well, if we look here to that report and what is needed, you see the 100%, which are the targets for production capacity to reach 2030, 55% reduction. We see that the different coloring is what we have in 2022. The light blue is what if we use the existing capacity to its full, and the yellow is the announced project. So statements about establishing plans and activities. So from this to say that we are on dry land is maybe a bit exaggerating, because it's seldom that we see all the announced projects go forward. But at least it should also show that we are going in the right direction, but the speed is a question. And for instance, I'm a bit concerned when I see wind. This should be much larger, because wind and solar is going to be the backbone of the electricity system in the future, and very much so also in Europe. So this needs to be speed up. And this is what ERA is about, of course, to research these technologies to get them faster on the market. And this curve, is very telling about the price of PV modules. This is the global average. And looking at these numbers is really flabbergasting to see how much this has been reduced. I mean, going back to the 70s, obviously, is a bit speculative, but if you go back to 2008, this kind of reductions is just amazing what competitive advantage has been gained here. And to the right, you also see the power generation cost and solar doing very well. So we shouldn't be so surprised when we see these curves on growth in solar. If we look to wind, it's also very positive that there's a lot of new capacity added. Notably, you see China is really gearing up on wind. And this is a huge target also for Europe to have 300 gigawatt of wind. And there is a big discussion about, okay, we are just releasing ourselves from the dependence on Russian gas, but are we moving into a situation we are becoming completely dependent upon raw materials from Asia? And 57% of the wind turbine industry is actually and production capacity is actually in Europe. And moving from one dependency to another, we need to reshore a lot of these resources, and that is all about the Critical Raw Materials Act and the report which we are launching today. And the same figure here, which is a bit busy, I must admit, but you see the levelized cost of electricity on both onshore and offshore wind also exhibits the same kind of dramatic drops, and dramatic drops you really need. So this means that we need to triple the investment in clean energy to 2030. And looking to, I mean, you may be flabbergasted by this $1 trillion, but we're still talking about small investment compared to other efforts which are managing like crises like the COVID. If you look to the GDP of some of the major economies in the world and so forth, this is doable. If we were a deglobalized world, at least, that would be possible. And looking at the primary energy demand, obviously it has to be like that. But as I started off in my introduction, can everything be solved by growth? I posted a contribution to Forbes in August about this post-growth strategies and how we need to think about that as well, not only about growing everything, because we know there are limitations to growth. And this is heavily debated about in academic circles, also in ERA. But I think that is an integral part of this question. Of course, the demand reduction is also a part of that debate. But I think that we need to pull all the stops in terms of reaching some of these targets which are shown today, and that nothing could be possible. And with that, I will just take this quote, which is from the Net Zero Emission 2050 report of the IEA, which says, "We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now." This is actually a quote from Martin Luther King in a different setting, but same and maybe even more urgency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action, and that is what ERA is about, making nothing possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels, for your introduction. Thank you all for being here today, for those who made it to be physically present. I know that many people will be following remotely. It is my pleasure to introduce now the first guest speaker with Mrs. Sara Saastamoinen. Is it well pronounced? It is. And Mrs. Saastamoinen is Deputy Director General of the JRC, and she's overlooking basically all activities which are relating to energy. So it's my pleasure to leave you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, dear members and friends of the ERA, it is indeed a sad morning to start to work with. Our thoughts and condolences are with the victims of the terrorist attack. At the same time, we have crises, long-term crises that are going on and for which we have to continue our work. And one of them is indeed the climate change, and that work is our work on the research that we do in order to mitigate it, to prevent it, to slow it down. In this, when our Commission President, Ursula von Leyen, spoke in the State of Union speech this year, she spoke already about the boiling planet. Why? It is very dramatic to see it boiling, but indeed, in July and August this year were the hottest months of global record. The IPCC has told that just by using the fossil fuels infrastructure that we already have, so without abatement, we would and will overshoot our 1.5 degree limit. And your president just showed that and put the question that is it possible actually then to keep it? When hearing this kind of reports, we do have these questions that is it then already too late? Can we do something? There are also reports like the International Energy Agency that thinks it's not too late. The Commission and the European Union is fully committed to work that it wouldn't be too late. And that's what I believe, that by indeed working together, we can handle also this challenge of the mankind. We are seeing some positive results. In 2022, we doubled the additional deployment of renewables across the EU. More electricity was produced from wind and solar than from gas, reducing the EU's CO2 emissions by a full 2.5%. Earlier this year, the EU's biggest geothermal heating system was launched in Hungary, providing affordable energy to over 28,000 households and 400 public buildings. And I again refer to the State of Union speech where our president named the world's first methanol-powered cargo ship in Copenhagen that can lead the way to the decarbonizing shipping. So we have been working already, and we are working to make the European Green Deal target reality. One part of the work is putting the right regulatory framework, the obligations, the targets. We have the Fit for 55 package, Repower Europe, the Green Deal Industrial Plan, Electricity Market Design Reform, the SET Plan, and the revision is indeed on its way. It's really only within the last 3 years that we have set these measures. They have been introduced. And some of them are actually only on the way of fully to be adopted. So this, on my experience and the European policy making, is really a fast track record, how quickly we have tried to make the regulatory changes. We have to then also implement them. And at the Joint Research Centre, it's been a very intense period supporting the policymakers, first by proposing and setting the regulatory framework, and secondly now we need to implement it. But when implementing, that is, a Joint Research Centre is a scientific service in the Commission that is, let's say, a small core. What we need the cooperation with all of the research community, and that means you in the area of the energy research. Thinking that in 2021, the EIA calculated that almost half of the emission reductions needed to reach the net zero by 2050, it would be delivered by the technologies that are not yet in the market. So 2 years ago, 50% should be reduced, something that's not yet there. And now, after 2 years, this proportion is down to the 35%. that is, again, there we have done a very fast, enormous leap ahead. And that gives something to believe that we can do that also for the future. In the JRC, we are monitoring the development of the technology and the progress of innovation in a various way. We are tracking patenting applications across the world, and these patents tell us that the EU is leading the way in many areas of clean energy research. We also monitor investment on the R&I, and while that is growing, that is still too low. So we need to address those barriers that exist, which are holding back our startups and scale-ups. And we need to attract more private investment to support young businesses, particularly in this vulnerable scale-up stage. So what we need from you, what we encourage you, it is to fill this 35% technology cap. And next, I want to then mention something about the research priorities on these 8 strategic technologies that are mentioned or that are included in the Net Zero Industry Act. Again, one of our new regulatory acts that is in the last steps of the adoption. First, if we look at the solar and photovoltaic and solar thermal technologies, we are trying to head for the 1 terawatt of annual production globally, and for that we need to find ways to reduce the use of the substitute critical materials. So it means developing new recycling technologies and long-term reliability that will help us to make the most of the materials that we already have. On the onshore and offshore renewable technologies, in this area, we need to scale up and speed up our manufacturing procedures with automation. Also, substitute materials, circularity, extended lifetimes are applicable in this area. And digital solutions can be mentioned. Going over to the battery and storage technologies, again, it's the word of recycling. So we must work on the recycling to reduce our dependencies. And that, by the way, that is naturally again one of the areas where we have the new regulatory framework with the new batteries regulations that came into force in this August. Furthermore, the Net Zero Industry Act, it lists heat pumps. For the heat pumps, we need to make them even cheaper to own and operate. Here, President Rökke showed you the different, these different ways of producing heat pumps. Where actually one of they're at the lower end, what has been currently and what is currently in use. So where there's a greatest potential. So that is something that we are working also on under the REPower EU. For the electrolyzers and fuel cells, it's the critical raw materials that are of major concern. We need to reduce the material intensity and substitute critical raw materials with alternatives. We need more energy efficiency, durability, circular design, new recycling technologies. And if we think actually now, I mean, when going through the various areas, we are seeing that there's a model, there's a pattern. So even if each technology, they have their own characteristics, there are challenges, but what comes clear is that this energy transition is the material transition. It's the material questions. And the large-scale deployment is throwing up questions of sustainability and sovereignty for the EU. We are also talking at the same time about the Critical Raw Materials Act and the economic security for the EU. So besides the climate target, it is also about our ability to compete in the global economy. And as mentioned, we are indeed world-class innovators. then the question is how we can become the world-class producers in all these areas. Just to finish this list then, under the Net Zero Industry Act, we have also there the sustainable biogas and methane, which can replace fossil fuels. And here the EU is actually the largest producer of the biogas today, with two-thirds of the global biogas production. There, the important challenge is to enlarge the feedstock base, expand into new substrates like agricultural residues and organic solid waste. In the carbon capture and storage technologies, we need to address a host of scientific issues in the capture side, such as solvent degradation, high energy consumption. And on the storage side, it's about the infrastructure. We have to work on that one, developing the CO2 storage atlas, for example, and transport and storage specifications. And I'm finishing a list with the grid technologies. The network needs to become smarter, replacing the older one, old school top-down approach with more distributed interconnected grid. So there's a lot of work there. I mean, one can say that pick and choose what interests you, but there's the work that is needed. And it is, many of them are cross-cutting issues, cross-border issues, so this is also truly also the international and jointly European endeavor. So we will need to work together. And actually, I don't know about precisely your scientific disciplines, but it has to be multidisciplinary. And I'm talking about then on the natural sciences, environmental sciences, biological sciences, and I hope that you have also sociologists and socio-economic people there, because it is this whole actually chain that can then help to make the difference, and economists and naturally also people on the marketing and so on. To making research on that one, so technology transfers. So how can that be actually developed at the European level? We also, in the JRC, we try to do all of that, we try to support. We are privileged to play a coordinating role in the SET plan. So we monitor and report the clean energy technology innovation in the Europe. In this SET plan, naturally the ERA is playing a central role in coordinating then the energy researchers in line of the plan. I'm happy to tell that we are revising the SET plan. I'm not able yet to announce all the substance. There are some improvements bringing horizontal issues that I mentioned already. We try to bring forward the circularity, the materials, digitalization, and that way try to bring our innovation to the markets. But then there are some issues in the SET plan that do need to be actually revised, and that is indeed the role of the ERA. So I would like to finish by thanking you for your work and congratulating you of the two latest reports that we will be then happy to get presented today on the energy demands and then the second one that was on the securing critical raw materials analysis. So both will fit very well as a basis also of the future revised SET plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Vastamoinen, and I can reassure you very much that we are totally conscious and supporting the idea that the transition needs really to be addressed from a multidisciplinary perspective. And this was very much, by the way, the key message of the first flagship report that we launched here 2 years ago, which was called the White Paper on the Clean Energy Transition. And one of the very visible, I would say, outcome of this is this report that we published today on the demand reduction. And we'll be probably launching next year a report on the importance of the societal engagement for transition, which we feel is absolutely essential also to drive the clean energy transition. Thank you very much for your speech again, and we look very much forward to supporting the Commission and JRC in these endeavors. The next speaker is not present and will address the audience with a pre-recorded message. It is my pleasure to introduce Sandrine Dixons de Clèves, who is co-president of the Club of Rome. And I suppose most of you know about the Club of Rome, which made itself very famous 50 years ago, a bit more than 50 years ago, when it commissioned a report called The Limits of Growth, also called the Meadows Report, which was unfortunately very much forgotten for almost 50 years, and which comes back with, I would say, striking evidence at the moment. So it is my pleasure to introduce Sandrine. I hope that the technicalities have been solved. Is it possible to, yes? Yes, you can launch it. We apologize. We need to change a little bit the setting of the conference because of what has happened this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry that I can't be with you this week. What I wanted to do was open up with a presentation on shifting from the limits to growth to Earth for All, living within limits. What I want to do with you today is to lead you through our process of reflection as we've shifted over 50 years of reflection, looking at the results of the limits to growth, which warned that if growth trends continued, we would overshoot Earth's capacity, that we needed to address consumption patterns and population growth, and the fact that actually most of the scenarios that were demonstrated in the limits to growth showed us that in the 2020s we would start to see severe tipping points. Fast forward to today, and now we know that it's time to change course. 2 years ago, we decided to work together with a series of scientists and economists to produce Earth for All, a survival guide for humanity. A series of, again, scenarios that would demonstrate through the system dynamic modeling what is actually necessary for us to get out of the mess that we've created for ourselves. And what we've seen is that if we look at the interconnected global instabilities, that we have to take into consideration the social system and the socio-economic inequalities that are demonstrated through our current social system, but also the sense-making and disruption by media and the growing economic insecurity, that we need to link the social system with the economic system, the mass unemployment, the great resignation, the endemic economic insecurity, short-termism, profiteering, and trade wars. That this, with the global commons, is creating the severe tipping points that we see today. And the polycrisis, which not only includes the pandemic, climate tipping points, and species extinction, but also growing social tension. And that this is linked to our governance systems. How is it that we ensure that our political system continues to be democratized? That we don't actually have growing polarization and distrust and a growth in nationalism and populism. That we pull back in international cooperation, as we're seeing right now through the issues of the Ukrainian invasion and now obviously in the Israeli-Gaza tension points. So we need to address not only these geopolitics and the interlocked importance of those four key systems, but also talk about the elephant in the room. That international efforts to fight the climate crisis and the other environmental crises are remaining focused on supply side and technological solutions, and not taking into consideration perversities in our markets and our economic, social systems. that greening the supply side will not be enough to deliver targets set or address poverty and inequality. That we must stop ignoring the inherent wastefulness of our production and consumption, especially in the North, and take into consideration demand-side measures which get us closer to the essential questions of responsibility and equity. Because at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, we know that a percentage of CO2 emissions is predominantly being produced by the richest 10%. Who are responsible for almost half of total lifestyle consumption emissions. We also know that there is a deep inequality between the low-income countries that are not actually getting the wealth distribution from our global commons that is so necessary, and also the impacts that we're seeing from the emissions coming from the high-income countries. So for this, we must transform our economics, and we must look at different types of economic models, which is exactly what we've been doing, not only through Earth for All, but the work actually of the Club of Rome, shifting from an extractive GDP-based economy, but also taking into consideration social and environmental risks in financial and economic decision-making. Thinking through the perspective of public goods and socializing the rewards of environmental and social commons. Correcting the inequity, not only between high and low income countries created by international finance and trade systems, but also within countries. And increasing the agency of women and workers to drive the direction of the economy, taking into consideration all of the different types of economic models that we have. This is what has led us to shifting from the limits to growth, to understanding where we are in the planetary boundaries now that we've actually surpassed 6 out of the 9 boundaries, coming to a reflection in Earth for All, and now just recently SDG for All, strategic scenarios that were presented to the UN. The Earth for All model uses a system dynamic modeling to actually produce scenarios and show how different policies are likely to affect human well-being, societies, ecosystems in the short and long term. This is what we call the spaghetti, the interlinked, very important integration of a variety of different indicators in order to enable us to think through how do we actually produce alternative futures, and what is necessary to produce those alternative futures in terms of recommendations directly to policymakers, business leaders, and citizens at large. But what our modeling shows us is that the speed of action on planetary boundaries is a function of the speed of action on inequality and poverty. That global well-being is actually declining, and that with it, social tension is increasing. When we interviewed G20 citizens across the globe, we saw that 74% of G20 citizens want a well-being economy and a shift from the current extractive economy that is not servicing their needs nor planetary needs. A system change agenda in order to reach this well-being is actually based on 5 key turnarounds, focusing on poverty, taking into consideration the empowerment of men and women across the globe in order to enable more diversity in decision-making, but also particularly girls and women to have access to education, addressing inequality within countries and also between countries, and addressing the need to shift towards regenerative food, energy efficiency, and obviously clean technology for renewables and new energy dynamics. Global policy and poverty would be drastically reduced by 2050 with a giant leap scenario. As you can see in this slide, if we shift from today and the too little too late scenario, which is the absolute scenario of business as usual, and we move towards the giant leap, applying the 5 key turnarounds, you can see that we start to reduce poverty all the way through to 2050, where we actually, in the too little too late scenario, have continued poverty, whereas alleviation actually is quite radical in terms of the giant leap. And this means that there are millions of people that will be above $6.85 per day and actually attain a salary of $15,000 per year. A world with less inequalities, also what we find with the giant leap in the application of our 5 key turnarounds. So again, looking at the dramatic difference, moving from 2020 all the way to 2050, and the increase in inequality under the too little too late scenario, today's current business as usual, and the difference with the giant leap scenario. Now, why is this so important? Because we know that poverty and inequality, as I indicated, will not enable us to reach our objectives with regard to remaining within the planetary boundaries. But also that if we do not reduce social tension because of poverty and inequality, we will see an increase in dramatic wars, tensions, and also migration that will increase actually this social tension across the globe. So we must look at the giant leap as an opportunity also to preserve stability and democracies within our societies. And the importance here is that this is a critical feedback loop, that the action on planetary boundaries, as I indicated, as a function of action on inequality and poverty, means that we need to actually look at creating the political space that is available for transformative public action, that social trust will influence this space, that how effectively the state intervenes to reduce inequality and planetary breakdown will be very important in terms of ensuring a growth in actually greater well-being and a reduction in social tension. That the links actually with food and energy is fundamental, that we cannot continue to have windfall profits, for example, in the food and agricultural sector or in the energy sector on the back of energy and food poverty. And that actually growing tension can create a dramatic shift towards populistic governments that will not respect democracy nor the objectives that we have put forward for ourselves, whether it be in Europe or globally around climate change, ecosystems protection, as well as social protection. So achieving well-being for all is within our reach if we apply the giant leap from our thinking and our Earth for All system dynamic model. And if we actually think through what does this mean within a European region at a time when we are still in the midst of a Ukrainian invasion and we know that we will have growing tensions. It means putting in place policies that protect vulnerable populations against price spikes immediately, by unlocking short-term increases in the supply of food and energy, by targeting short-term relief on households and businesses that need it most, by designing distribution markets that protect consumers from future price spikes. It also means a diversification of supply chains and import markets, ensuring that we look at the diversity of food varieties and sources of food imports, but also addressing fossil and renewable energy imports and diversifying the sources for critical materials so that we are actually not dependent on perverse relationships that we have created with autocratic governments and governments that will hold on to some of these materials and create real disruption across our value chains. But it also means accelerating the substitution of increasingly costly imported products through regional and renewable resources, relocalizing food production, shifting to regional renewable energy supply, relocalizing material extraction, and thinking through the way in which we consume. Because reducing final demand for increasingly costly resources and products is one of the best solutions that we can think of. Again, coming back to our premise that we cannot move beyond the limits to growth, that we must think through our consumption patterns and reduce demand for cereals going to animal feed and biofuels, and reduce demand for fertilizers through regenerative agriculture, and reduce energy and material consumption through behavioral shifts, thinking through our systems, our mobility system, as ensuring that we get people from A to B, ensuring that we invest in the right types of efficient buildings, but also in thinking through that mobility with buildings will create communities that reduce consumption and dependency across materials and take into consideration real essential needs and eliminate wastage. It also means that we need to enhance resource productivity to get more out of constrained supply by reducing this food waste, by improving energy efficiency, as I indicated, in buildings and industry, by shifting to circularity in materials and value chains, and by ramping up use of agricultural and industrial byproducts. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the decisive decade. There is no time for complacency, but there is also no time for despair. We believe at Earth for All and at the Club of Rome that actually putting in place these 5 key turnarounds, thinking through our consumption patterns, focusing on demand-side management is fundamental if we are going to get us out of the current greatest existential risk that humanity is facing today. Thank you.
So it's a pity that Mrs. Dixon de Clève is not there. We would have liked to thank her in presence for this very enlightening words, and which I believe really very much echo a lot of the indications that we have developed into the demand reduction report. The next speaker will also address the audience remotely through a pre-recorded message. Mr. Philippe Lamberts is a member of the European Parliament. He's co-chair of the Greens EFA group. And he's also the MEP who was launching and organizing a very important conference at the Parliament, which happened in May, which was called Beyond Growth. It was a 3-day, full 3 days conference with eminent speakers from across the globe. And it is my pleasure to introduce Philippe Lambert through a remote message.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks to the European Energy Research Alliance for inviting me. But as you know, inviting members of the European Parliament during a plenary week in Strasbourg is not really very convenient. So I have had to give you this video message instead of being physically with you. And believe me, I would have liked to be there, because it's not often that you bump into people who are prepared to discuss energy demand reduction. In a world where growth seems to be a sort of mantra, speaking about reduction of anything seems to be odd. So let me give you a bit of context, and I know I'm speaking after Sandrine Dixon, so I guess that I will be repeating maybe some of what she said. But first, we can be happy that during this term in the European Parliament, the European Green Deal has been launched. I keep reminding people that when Juncker left 4 years ago, in his farewell message, he did not even pronounce once the word climate, neither the word environment. That tells you how much this counted for him. And mind you, the COP21 in Paris happened under his watch, but not even worth mentioning. And so indeed, the launch of the European Green Deal by Ursula von der Leyen was a welcome change. And I would say that the very fact that the European Green Deal, instead of being killed by the pandemic, was put front and center in our response. And then when the war hit after COVID, that again, the opportunity to kill it was not enacted by the majority, is rather a good sign. Now, if I look at the way the majorities, the political majorities, both in Council and Parliament, are talking about the European Green Deal, it is pretty much about replacing fossil fuels by renewables and keeping the same business model based on growth, based on endless growth of our energy consumption. And that, of course, is an impossibility. And so I might say that during the reaction to the war, in the first year, it was remarkable that von der Leyen put forward a target of reducing our energy consumption by 15% by year end, and actually that was even beaten by many member states, including Germany, which shows you how much, how should I say, we were wasting energy. I mean, if it was so easy to reduce energy demand by 15 or 20% without reducing production by the same amount, that tells you that there were quite a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of energy demand reduction. And of course, I welcome that, but that was the easy part. That was the easy part. I do believe that there's still a form of denial in the political majorities that indeed there are planetary boundaries, that indeed it's not only that we have limits to the amount of CO2 that we can put in the atmosphere, but also limits of the amount of lithium, cobalt, copper that there is on this planet. And we will need to make choices. And, well, most don't want to make choices between the various activities that humans are doing. And there's this sort of blind belief that technology will allow us to free ourselves from any constraint. And indeed, I like the link that ERA is making between resilience and energy demand reduction, because actually, if we want our societies to be resilient, they will need to be more cautious in the way they use energy. And this is by far not a shared concern across political families. You might say, yeah, but last year Macron mentioned that the time of abundance was over. Yeah, okay, he said that once, and that was it. That was it. There's no real questioning of the model. And indeed, my starting point is that there are planetary boundaries, and also that we have to realize that the fossil era was a sort of parenthesis, because the energy return on energy invested of fossil cannot possibly be beaten. And any renewable energy is less dense, less efficient than just burning, well, extracting and burning oil. So we won't beat that. And so we have to recognize that not only materials are scarce, but also that the amount of energy that we can produce is limited, unless, of course, we someday get to nuclear fusion, but we are far from it. So let's not bank on that for the moment. And so indeed, we will need to make choices. And that is, of course, what policymakers hate doing. I was struck last summer that not only airports were full, but actually we beat the world record of the number of flights over a day. This is precisely the kind of stuff that we really cannot afford. We have to question transportation. Do we need to transport so many people, so many tons over so long distances? This is something that probably will need to shrink if we want to respect planetary boundaries. I might talk also about agriculture. Actually, the agricultural model that we have at the moment is one based on fossil fully. So it's massive, it's intensive, it's large scale, and so it cannot work without chemicals that you put in the ground, without the oil-based chemicals, of course, and then without the oil that you put in the machines. That we have to not to get rid of that, but to shrink again the model and rely on ecosystem services rather than on oil to make our agriculture productive. This is all possible, but again, it's an example of choices to be made. And if you look at the common agricultural policy, it's the exact opposite. I mean, this is one of the areas that were totally left immune from the European Green Deal, and I would guess it's going to be a major battle of the next term if we want the European Green Deal to really enter phase 2 and cover the areas that were left behind in the first part. So these are the policy choices that need to be made. It's going to be tough, and you can already feel lots of resistance for the action that has already been decided under the first chapters of the European Green Deal. Count on the right and the far right to increase opposition to even thinking about demand reduction, leveraging actually the social discontent that there is, because at the moment it is still looking like it's going to be the ordinary people in society that are going to bear the brunt of the effort, while capital owners will be left alone. So these are the policy challenges that we need to face. But thanks for putting this on the agenda. I think we really need to do that. And I'm looking forward to work with you to put that on the agenda for the next European Commission starting in 2024. Thank you.
So again, great thanks to Mr. Philippe Lamberts for this very interesting insights, which I believe really converge with what has been said by Sandrine Dixon de Clèves and very much also on what we're developing in the demand reduction report. The last guest speaker was supposed to be with us today, but unfortunately cannot make it for the reasons you know. But Mrs. Paola Pino has accepted to be connected by remote link and make her address to the audience remotely. So it's my pleasure to introduce Paola Pino, who is Deputy Director General of DG Energy at the European Commission. And so I hope the link is active.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm terribly sorry that I can't be with you.
No, this is not Paola Pino.
Yes, Abdel, I'm with you. I can see you, but I...
Hello, Paola. We cannot see you yet. You can see us. Okay, good.
I
but we can hear
see you, and I'm told that on your side somebody needs to disable my camera. But if else, I would. It's good already that you can hear me.
We can hear you. We'll try to fix the problem from our side. If we cannot do it in the next minute, then we'll go just for listening to you. I'm looking behind to see what's. So we really apologize again, but it was not foreseen to have remote interventions, so we had to change the setting at the last minute. I'm waiting for information from the technical people. So at any rate, thank you very much, Paola, for being with us this morning. I don't know to what extent you were able to hear the previous messages from Mr. Sastamoinen from the JRC, Sandrine Dixon de Clèves from the Club of Rome, and Philippe Lamberts from the European Parliament.
Yes, Abdel. Well, listen. If you agree, I can start.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, we'll do that. We don't see you, but we will be listening to you very carefully. So, Paola, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. The image is the least important in this case, and the plan was indeed, as you said, that I would be joining you on site, and that was my plan. Clearly until this horrible developments, and it's really the time to stand together, to stand united, and express our wish for peace. Still, it's a pleasure to be able to reach out to you, and be it virtually and be it without image. But the fact that you are gathering is really a sign that the research community is still, and as never before, very strong and committed to its cause, and that the set plan activities, its bodies, continue to play a very important role in our way to a decarbonized energy system. And already in the way you organize this conference and the topics you chose show that you are very much following very closely some of the very important topics that became also flagships for today, notably with the topic of demand reduction and access to critical raw materials. And precisely, let me say a few words about that. Regarding demand reduction, you know that all 27 EU member states are committed to turning the EU into the first climate neutral continent by 2050. And to get there, we have all committed to reduce emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1999. Now, as part of this effort, energy demand reduction is absolutely key and is translated in energy efficiency improvements, which is a central pillar of the energy transition. Now, we are already working on the Energy Efficiency Directive, as you know, but with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, this triggered the need to further explore the possibilities to reduce demand of both gas and electricity. And you know that this was subject of 2 emergency pieces of legislation last year, whereby member states agreed to decrease their consumption of gas, to decrease their consumption of electricity, and this happened with success, even overshooting the voluntary targets. So clearly there is scope for such a reduction. But of course, when we do so, we are not interested in what we call demand destruction, meaning that we're losing industrial capacity, industrial output. We are interested in structural efficiency gains. And this is precisely what is foreseen in the Energy Efficiency Directive, which has been agreed and which has led us to an overall target which is higher and more ambitious than the original Commission proposal. So we have now adopted with the Council, with the European Parliament, the Energy Efficiency Directive, which foresees a reduction of 11.7% of energy consumption by 2030. This is a higher ambition than initially tabled by the Commission, and shows that everybody stands behind this the recognition that we need to seek efficiency gains in the way we produce, in the way we consume, in the way we distribute energy. And underpinning all of that is the energy efficiency first principle, which should also guide our decisions and also our investment decisions, because really it's about considering energy efficiency solutions as the first option when setting new rules for the supply side and for other policy areas. And in parallel to the legislative work, last year we were also promoting immediate energy savings through broad information campaigns and through the EU Save Energy Plan. And it was with content that we've seen that member states and actors across the board, the households, you and I, the industry, everyone, public authorities adhered to this saving energy plan by reducing their consumption of energy at home, public authorities by reducing the public lighting hours, reducing the heating and cooling of buildings. And it's clear that this also comes together with behavioral change and the way that we as consumers behave, but clearly there are structural efficiency gains to be made, and they can be made notably through digitalization, which is not a new area, of course, but where a lot still needs to be done, and the potential is there to be seized. And you know, we adopted last year the action plan for the digitalization of the energy system, and at the core of this action plan is the idea, notably, of developing a common European energy data space, which will facilitate the access and exchange of energy data. And by doing so, we will be opening the door for new energy efficiency services. And by the way, for those of you in the audience who are experts in the digitalization of the energy system, let me inform you about our expert group on that subject, the Smart Energy System Expert Group. A call for expression of interest is ongoing and open until the 6th of November. And on top of this efforts in the EU to really seize the potential of energy efficiency, we are also looking internationally and at how to make the best of this. And you will have heard that President von der Leyen initiated a call, an international call, to countries interested committing to a global energy efficiency target as part of a global pledge on energy efficiency, which is should be endorsed at COP28. And this really shows you that it's a combination of efforts and that we're not just stopping at the EU level, and we're really trying to seek partners in this pledge to seeking the benefits of energy efficiency across the world. And everyone's contribution, from industry to research and innovators, of course, is key. To households is absolutely decisive to seize this potential. A second topic you mentioned is critical raw materials. And here again, we need to recognize that in the future, the true energy, economic and climate security will come from our increased share of renewable energies in our energy mix. It will come from enhancing energy efficiency, and therefore we need to have critical raw materials, which will be absolutely key to ensure the deployment of the clean energy technologies that we need for such a decarbonized energy system. Therefore, I'm very pleased that ERA has chosen the access to critical raw materials as one of the key topics for this year's conference, because these are the materials that are indeed part of the building blocks of our clean energy technologies. They are part to the production of solar panels, wind turbines, batteries for energy storage, electric vehicles, you name it. And without a secure access to critical raw materials and a sustainable access to critical raw materials, our transition to a net zero society could be significantly hindered. And that is why this is now currently being discussed as part of a legal proposal by the Commission on the critical raw materials. It's the so-called Critical Raw Materials Act, which is precisely aimed at strengthening the EU's critical raw materials capacities along all stages of the value chain, from the mining, the processing, and all the value chain included. And the idea is really to increase our resilience by reducing dependencies, by increasing preparedness and promoting supply chain sustainability and circularity. And here, research, your work will absolutely be key in allowing for such sustainable and circular production and processing of the critical raw materials. And therefore, research will also enable us to anticipate potential bottlenecks and vulnerabilities in the energy system and devise strategies on how to address them. Hand in hand with the Critical Raw Materials Act came also the proposal for a Net Zero Industry Act, which is about overcoming the barriers to the scale-up of the manufacturing of net zero technologies. It's about increasing the competitiveness of our industrial base and improving the union's energy resilience. And here again, research, innovation is absolutely key. And in this sense, I would also draw your attention to the annual report on the competitiveness of clean energy technologies, which we are about to publish in the Commission, and which will show also where we are in the various key clean energy technologies. And of course, I could not omit the revision of the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, where we've been working together also with input, valuable input from ERA, and where we are focusing on leveraging synergies with other EU initiatives and funding schemes. And we will suggest a task force to work on access to market of our clean energy technologies. This revision of the SET plan will be published this week. So this is good news, and clearly also the result of also your work. Therefore, and to conclude, let me really thank the research community for the excellent work in Europe, and let me leave you with a plea that your work, your research is absolutely key for us to be able to step up and build the technologies and have the technologies that we need to make the decarbonization of our energy system a reality. And we are and remain available to work very closely with you. Thank you very much. And my apologies again that I could not be with you in person this morning.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Pino, for being with us remotely today. And so it is my pleasure now to present you briefly some of the highlights of the demand reduction report that we just released today, as you know. Is it possible to have the slides projected, please? And so I'm Adel Gamad, Secretary General of the European Energy Research Alliance. I suppose this is it. Okay, good. So the first slide is unfortunately well known already, but I think it's very interesting to spend a few minutes on it. This represents the global primary energy demand, global, so worldwide. And you could see, of course, that the really inflection happened in the early 60s. In fact, if we look at 1960 and we look now in 2022, we have multiplied by a factor of 4 our primary energy consumption, which is absolutely dramatic. If we look at the reference point, which is 1990, which is the reference point for all what is climate related and for most of the EU policies, we see that globally, this is not Europe, globally, the primary energy demand has also increased by 63%, absolutely huge. And what is maybe even worse as an element of this graph, it's showing in fact that despite the impression that we have, certainly in Europe, where we're extremely active and dynamic in deploying renewable energy sources, we see that at global level, it's still totally marginal. In fact, you don't even see the lines of wind, solar, and so on. They represent together 5 to 6% of the primary energy demand, not in Europe, globally. And so globally, we still rely on more than 90%, for 90% of our primary energy demand is from fossil sources. This includes traditional biomass, which is mainly wood, but 90% we're burning fossil fuels. It's just amazing. Of course, one can argue on these figures because this also relates to the way we account for renewable source in the primary energy demand. But altogether, it means that vastly all the world is run still today on fossil fuels. And we know that we need to bring these fossil fuels to zero or close to zero if we are serious about reaching the Paris Agreement. If we look at the European perspective, and this is the global final energy consumption in Europe, so it's final, it's not primary. It's quite interesting to see that it has remained globally mostly constant. We haven't since 1990, so over the last 30 years, we haven't increased much of final energy consumption. And you see, it's quite interesting that the first line, first band representing, in fact, the industry has been decreasing. And the reason is, unfortunately, not because, or mainly, because we have increased the efficiency of our industry. It's very much because we have outsourced a lot of our heavy industry outside the borders of Europe. And emissions are re-imported through semi-finished or finished goods within Europe. You see that all the other bands either are remaining more or less constant or are increasing. And in particular, if you look at household, which is a quite important element, it is not decreasing. So despite the energy efficiency efforts that we are trying to implement, we are seeing very much of the rebound effect, which means that the energy that we save, on the one hand, we use it for something else. The fact that you are having a better insulation in your home goes usually with the fact that people tend to go, at least for the last 30 years, to bigger homes, to bigger surfaces, or tend to put their heating 1 or 2 degrees higher than before. So this shows that it's very, very difficult to reduce our energy consumption, and basically that despite all our efforts, the energy consumption has been remaining mostly constant. You see also, by the way, there the importance of transport, which has been increasing quite significantly and which echoes very much what Philippe Lamberts was mentioning a bit earlier. If we look now how, and again, now we move back to a global perspective, and this is another way to show what has been discussed by Niels in his introductory remarks, but also evoked by the other speakers. We see that whatever the way you look at it, we are totally off track globally of reaching the Paris Agreement, 2 degrees Celsius, be it, of course, 1.5 degrees Celsius. And what you see is on the top is basically the trajectories under either the stated policies or the pledges which are the national determined contributions. There is, of course, a range because some of these NDCs are conditional. It also there is a level of uncertainty on what will be the effect on emissions of these contributions. But altogether, even in the best case, you see that we're totally off track of the curve that we should be following in terms of emission reductions. And again, you see there the target gaps, which are absolutely enormous. This, by the way, I forgot to say, shows the total emissions, which include LULUC, which is land use and the land use change and forestry. Just to give you an idea, and this is something I often mentioned, when the world was almost at a standstill because of the lockdown, the total emission reduction globally was a little bit less than 6% on this year. And this is approximately the level of reduction that we should showcase every year, year on year, cumulatively. And increasing, of course, because as you reduce the base, the rate of reduction should increase. And this should increase at the moment where you will hit the hard-to-abate sectors. So this is just to show you what is the importance of the impact on the way we relate to energy if we're serious about climate change. Another way to look at it is looking at the climate budget. This is not shown on the graph, but according to the latest estimates, if we want to reach 1.5 degrees with 50% probability of not overshooting it, which is very low. If I cross the street, I would like to have more than 50% chances of getting to the other side of the street, then we would exhaust our carbon budget probably in the next 3 to 5 years. And there is absolutely no reason to believe that this will not happen because our infrastructure is generating these emissions and this will not change overnight. Simply, it will not change overnight. So a plan exists to reach net zero, and I think Niels has presented this morning the latest update of the IEA, which is the net zero update. This is a graph showing the same, but a little bit older from the World Energy Outlook 2022. So it's almost one year old. And probably the other thing which is new in this graph is the way it is shown, because what needs to be done remains always the same. And if you look at each of the targets, you may wonder if any of these is realistic in Europe, not to say globally. If we look just at one, no new internal combustion engine car sales by 2035, we know the difficulty we have already to pass that in Europe. What about the rest of the world. And I remind us all that Europe is only responsible for 7%. EU27 is responsible for 7% of the global emissions. So I think if you analyze this with a little bit a bit critically, none of these objectives are realistic, neither globally and not even in Europe. So the probability to reach them all collectively, in my view, is close to zero. I believe that no one would dare ever, as a CEO of a company, to show such a plan to a sport. I wouldn't, certainly. So this means that all the efforts that we have been doing and that we are doing to decarbonize the supply side, so producing energy, decoupling the emission reduction from the energy production and use, we need to, in parallel, also decrease the energy use. This is absolutely fundamental. And we have seen this was evoked earlier, the demand reduction. If I leave alone energy efficiency, which has been historically included in the policy making, but demand reduction has solely been used to address fossil fuels in times of crisis. This was the case for the first oil crisis, 73, second, 79, and the energy crisis we have seen after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. What we argue in this report is that if we are serious about decarbonizing our economy and reaching climate neutrality, we need in parallel to make all our efforts to deploy existing renewable technologies, continue to research for new technologies which will be more efficient than those and more cost-effective than those we have today, but in parallel that we need very seriously to address the demand side by reducing energy demand. This also should be done across all sectors. We have seen in the second slide that the final energy consumption was more or less evenly spread between households, industry, and transport. We need in the policy making to address demand reduction in all sectors. Sorry. Yeah. The impact of demand reduction, of course, is of reducing the emission levels, but we argue that this can be done without compromising the level of well-being, and this is a factor which is quite well developed in the report based on significant existing research. So it's really about looking at the energy service, not the energy consumption, and we argue that in many cases the same energy service could be delivered with a much less energy content. Now, in addition to that, reducing the energy demand has additional key benefits. First of all, it reduces environmental risk, and we know to what extent energy is linked to environment, in particular when we speak about the materials which are needed to build the energy technologies. It is reducing the cost of the clean energy transition, and we know to what extent the financing is one of the key elements which is hindering the acceleration of the clean energy transition. Reducing geopolitical pressure, this goes without saying, and it links immediately to the second report we're going to present later on the critical raw materials. And of course, it addresses the limitation of circularity and digitalization. Circularity has its own limitations. The demand expand really three major strategies on demand reduction. I will start with the energy efficiency, the center, which we all know very well, which is already integrated in the policy making, but which in itself doesn't guarantee an absolute reduction of the energy use. And this is because of many effects, but one of the most well-known is the so-called rebound effect. With the savings you realize with energy efficiency, you in fact transfer these savings into other activities which are energy and carbon intensive. And the end result is in many cases not a reduction of the final energy demand. The energy sufficiency is a rather new concept that we believe it should be absolutely central to policymaking. Energy sufficiency is about looking at the way to deliver a similar energy service, but with much less energy content. And this is absolutely fundamental, and this is new. It's not integrated in the policymaking as is today. An example of energy sufficiency would be, for instance, if you look at a policy measure, it would be banning flights, short distance flights, which can be replaced by train, for instance. This is already the case in France. You deliver a very similar energy service, but with a much lower energy content. And of course, behavioral change is something which is absolutely fundamental, because this is what triggers your decision to move towards energy efficiency or an energy sufficiency measure. An example would be, if you look at transport again, electric vehicles is an energy efficiency measure. But if you decide rather to go for distributed mobility, for public transport, this is really about energy sufficiency. And this is, of course, a matter of behavioral change. The report concludes with a number of policy recommendations. So the first one, which is absolutely fundamental in our eyes, is that we need to include energy demand reduction as part, at the core of the policymaking of the clean energy transition. The way to do it must be assorted with targets for energy demand reduction, and we've seen to what extent this has been extremely effective in times of crisis, as was mentioned by Paolo Pino. We need to integrate within the demand reduction strategies energy sufficiency elements into the long-term demand reduction policies. So this is structurally integrating demand reduction in the policy making. And this must be by encouraging investment in energy demand reduction. So there are a lot of areas where investment will be needed to foster this demand reduction. And finally, what is very essential to all of this is also making citizen engagement and community empowerment work. And citizen engagement is absolutely fundamental. We've evoked that earlier. It will probably be the subject of the next year flagship report of ERA. And with this, I will leave it for now, and it is my pleasure now to introduce our moderator, Mrs. Gurku, who will introduce the different panelists for the first panel, which will be discussing about demand reduction. So.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Anca Gurzu. I'm the Europe correspondent for Cypher. We're a climate tech publication focused on the technologies and solutions we need to reach net zero by 2050. We'll have a chance now to unpack and dive a bit deeper into the importance of energy demand reductions. And I'm going to just ask the panelists who are present here to please join me on stage, and I will introduce you in a moment. So please just join and have a seat. And we also have, hopefully, everything is going well online. So I'm going to introduce our panelists here on stage, and then hopefully we can also connect online. So I have next to me here Tina Koljonen. She's a research team leader for VTT, the Technical Research Center of Finland, and an ERA member. We have Guillermo Boragan Pedras, R&D project manager and a cognitive environmental scientist at Energyville, which is a project that's done in partnership with VITO, the Flemish clean tech research organization. And we have Camille Defar. She's the head of the Jacques Delors Energy Center. And, oh, great, I see Hélène Schrey. She's the head of unit for the clean energy transition for DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission. So we have everyone here. Can you hear us well, Hélène? Great. So, like I mentioned, we're going to have a chance now to really debate and discuss some of the main points we've heard in the first few hours of this conference. And basically, what we want to get at is why is it important to have a long-term strategy for energy demand reduction in Europe? And maybe it will just make sense then to start with Hélène and ask a bit of a broader question, hoping you can kind of pave the way for the conversation and just help us understand, in your own words, why is energy demand reduction important and where does it fit in the wider clean energy strategy?
Well, thank you and good morning to all. I'm sorry I could not be with you in person due to the current situation in Brussels. First of all, maybe when I began my career, I was indeed dealing with energy and creating the Observatory of Energy. So it's a little bit back. I'm saying that because it was long time ago and already we were speaking about reducing the demand. I still have very nice posters showing how you can reduce the heating and how you can improve the insulation of your house and so on. So what makes that 30 years after we are still there? There should be something somewhere where we have missed a step in analysis, and this is the thinking we are currently trying to have, at least in DG Research, because we see in the long run. Of course, enormous progress have been made, but the technology will not resolve everything if the technology is not adjusted to the needs of people. And we are speaking about human beings. We are not speaking about things. So taking into account the human dimension is critical if we want to reduce the energy demand, while, and that was one of the main messages of this ERA report, which I find extraordinarily interesting and very strong, the main message is let's count with human to have a real impact on reducing the demand of energy. It's clear that housing are really critical. It's clear that we are not dealing with an industry which is just adjusting cost, and we are really dealing with human behavior. And you don't impose human behavior, because if you impose something which is not matching the needs, you create discrimination immediately. The most educated or the richest or the most intelligent or the most computer literated people, I mean, they will better survive than the others. So you create discrimination. It's not only poor households, it's not only people living far from cities. I mean, this way of thinking, adjusting to a certain category of people, the technologies, is creating eviction. And eviction effects is creating discrimination. I mean, it's a basic principle in social economy. So the very good point of the ERA report is to also point that out. And it's not only poverty, it's also difficulties of accessibility. You can always say that the lift is costing too much energy, but if you are old, elderly, or if you are disabled, you need to have a lift, even for one floor. So there are many things that we need to embed the social needs into the development of technologies and into the demand. And I think it's one of the major messages of this report, because otherwise we will create an overreaction on some parts of the population. And social discrimination inevitably means to political reaction, which could be damaging our fight for reducing climate change. I will stop here, but this is one of the core messages, not only energy poverty, which is extremely important, but globally, affordability for all.
Thank you for that. I think you touched on some very important points, and I appreciated how you looked back and reflected on your career and kind of drew that parallel to where we started and the things we would have we missed along the way that we're still having some of these conversations today. And there's a few things that I would want to come back later in the conversation. But maybe we can actually move closer to the ground a bit. And I want to move to Guillermo now. And I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit from the work you're doing, and maybe you can explain that a little bit. What kind of evidence do we have that supports the need for energy demand reduction in the EU, and some examples you can give from your work? Yes, please, take a microphone. Of course. It's on.
Yes. So, hi, everyone. I'm very, very glad to be here today discussing with you all on this topic that I think is key, especially, not especially, but for the Europeans as well. Yeah, I think all the messages today have shown clearly that we are in a climate urgency. We even crossed, I think, the 7th boundary recently. That, yeah, another way to put also our impact. I like a lot this figure that I would like to share with you. But we are burning every day, the oil that the Earth needed between 100 and 500 million years to generate. So that shows us we are definitely unbalanced with the Earth system, right? And this is a strong message. We have seen it also the scenarios. We are not on the way, not even in Europe, with all the efforts, yeah, to reach the Paris Agreement's targets. So we need something else. This something else can be demand reduction strategies that were very nicely introduced a while ago. And I want to also show you or share with you a figure. I searched for some concrete numbers that you can also take on your own, but the Department of Environment, Transport and Regions in the UK calculated that these demand reductions can save up to 30% in the built environment. So it's definitely something that a resource that we have to include, even in the scenarios as well. You have associations like Negawatt in France that are also working a lot on this concept of sufficiency, and that tell us, well, we do need to integrate these calculations of demand reduction in our scenarios if we want to reach the goals. And now when it comes more to our research, there is, sorry for the turnaround, but I think it was very important to say that. Well, we see that any investment, any effort that is on demand reduction has, it creates positive loop. For example, think about flexibility, right? If you empower the end users by giving them the control of their consumptions, you are also giving them the opportunity to be flexible, to consume, for instance, where the energy prices are lower, or even to integrate some demand, some DER, distributed energy resources, like solar panels or electric vehicles, right? They can appropriate these resources that are there and that currently have even too high prices for some consumers, but if they can provide flexibility with it, we are somehow equalizing the opportunities of the general public. So this is, I think, very important. Something that I also wanted to say, and this is in relation directly to our research, is we have talked a little bit about the rebound effect, right? How when we save the rationality of the human behavior is over-consuming the savings we are supposed to make. And we have also seen today how, I think it was said today, right, that around the 10% of the richest are responsible for 50% of the emissions. So if we manage to balance a little bit better how we consume, for example, by establishing maximums of consumption, perhaps we can give, in this case, poor energy households the opportunity to consume more. And this is a bit paradoxical, right, to demand reduction. But what we see in our calculations is that these poor households are often in situations of underconsumption that threaten their well-being and their comfort. So if the ones saving more, I mean, using more, save more as well, the other ones can also structure a bit more or use more of this energy. And I think this is very new. And a last idea that I wanted to share with you, I was just discussing yesterday with my girlfriend and sister-in-law about the topic. I gave him a bit the speech and we were discussing, and my girlfriend said like, yeah, but this is not new. Demand reduction is not new, right? It has been there standing for a while. And I told her, yeah. But what is new is our understanding of how human behavior is. We have, I don't know if you realize, we have witnessed 2 Nobel Prizes in the last, I think it was 2007, 2012, with Kahneman and Taylor. And we know much better now than ever how to address these things and how to create social justice as well in using demand reduction strategies. So I think it's the time now to maximize these kind of strategies.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that there's more awareness, right, and understanding about how we can achieve that.
And specifically about our irrationality when making decisions. I think this is something that is, these behavioral sciences, psychology, are really helping us to understand much better how to deal with the general public, to empower the end consumers.
And maybe we'll get a chance to return to the rebound effect topic a bit later in the conversation because it's very interesting. But we've heard, we heard about policies, we heard about the EU level, we heard about some of the research. Tina, I want to move to the member state national level where you can help us fill that gap of this conversation. How does this need to have an energy demand reduction strategy translate at the member state level, and what are the challenges there?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And good morning or afternoon. I don't know where you are. But I have rather long history working to support policies in energy and climate and so on in Finland. So first of all, some while ago, I a little bit look at the history in Finland. I checked what has happened 20 years ago, and look at what has writings from the parliament. It says that the memos that saving energy is very important. We are not able to concentrate on Russian energy. It was a discussion about bioenergy. We know what is the discussion around now. So, and it is very important to increase energy efficiency. So that was 20 years ago and written in the documents in our parliament. And since then, what has happened? We can see the same kind of stories in the parliament, in our government reports and so on. But what has really happened is that our energy consumption is increasing. But of course, we have a lot of national laws, national legislations to increase energy efficiency. There isn't so much about saving energy, because if you think about policy making, saving is not so trendy to ask people to save energy. And what is now written in our new governmental program, that is about phasing out, of course, fossils, about increasing something like doubling the electricity production in Finland compared to today by 2030 or 35. So that is, everything is more or less about increasing. Of course, the challenge is, therefore, I want to say that we have the climate neutrality target by 2035. So that is the priority. But then how to achieve this? It is more or less a lot of investing in renewables. We are talking a lot about hydrogen economy. Finland even has targets to export renewable green hydrogen to Europe to help other member states, and also maybe to also export electricity, renewable electricity, or even nuclear to Europe. So most of the stories are increasing. In the national legislation, the climate is still in the first place. But then when we are looking at the harmonizing the policies, so looking not only the climate, but also looking maybe even going beyond the energy. Because I think that we need to also look at, like what has said, that we need to look at the materials, we need to look at the circular economy. Circular economy that is a very key thing, but also many processes to circulate increase energy. We have also in Finland, we have a strategy to implementing strategy for circular economy. We have been working for like more than 1 year, looking at all possible material streams in Finland, making the input-output analysis, including also energy and materials, emissions, LULUCF, and everything. And we can see that the only way is not to put one single policies for circular or climate or energy. We have to put everything together. So I think that is the only solution when we are really looking at sustainable future, clean energy transition. We need the demand reduction in energy, in materials, and this comes then the sufficiency, changing behaviors, and so on. So these are the key. What is the situation now? And then if we look at the future, what are the key challenges?
So what I'm hearing you say is that often at the national level in different countries, it's kind of difficult to ask people to save energy. The focus is often on, you'll see it in policies, you might have some policies on energy demand reduction, but still consumption is growing. And usually when you ask people to save, it's in relation to reducing fossil fuel. That's basically your...
Yeah, but what was happening during the last year, during the energy crisis, also in Finland, we really reduced our energy consumption. But now, because of a lot of new wind power, we have Olkiluoto 3 running. So our electricity prices have been like 0 or even minus, several hours a day, or even during the whole day. So the variation in prices is really high. But people are still saving energy. So now we can see that there has been some behavioral change, which is partly also still happening there. Yeah. And it was also when we were looking at the oil crisis during the 70s, it was also very funny to read the Finnish papers that what kind of policies were there. They were pretty much the same what was happening. The only thing I didn't find what was happening there, in the 70s Finnish policymakers were even thinking about that TV broadcasts will not happening on Mondays. But that was never happening in the end. But this kind of thing, thinking out of the box, that is really important. And then if we are looking at, for example, the younger generations, we were organizing this kind of SDG hackathon at the university, Aalto University. And we were asking the students to create some innovations to save energy and make it a habit. And the thinking was really out of the box. I think we are more like a middle age here. So the thinking was totally different. They were really motivated. I think that we also need to look at the new generations. We are not thinking only looking at the discussions. It would be nice to have a young generations also here in the audience. Maybe online somebody.
The new generation, yes. And I wonder whether the example of Finland is a reflection of all the member states. I somehow doubt it when it comes to energy efficiency and energy savings. But we heard some good examples. But I want to bring in Camille and then also a new term, not so new, but it has already been mentioned, of energy sufficiency, right? Where does that fit in this debate? And can you explain it to us?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for this invitation. And congratulations for the great report you've put in. Very timely, right before the European elections. It really fits into our work at the Jacques Delors Institute as well. But we also see working on this very important issue of pushing for the demand reduction in the EU election debate, but also for the next Commission term. We see how few we are. So, I mean, really happy to be here and happy that you've published this piece. Coming back to sufficiency, it just entered the IPCC report in the last edition, so really recently. And it is referring to a set of measures that aims to avoid energy demand, but not only energy demand, but also natural resources. So it also includes avoiding demand for water, land, etc. And so the key also concept of sufficiency is also to deliver well-being that was very well highlighted by your presentation, Adel El-Gamal. So well-being within planetary boundaries, which are, many of them are already crossed. We are indeed in a state of climate emergency. And it's different from efficiency, because efficiency is about delivering the same service with less resources, whereas efficiency is really about thinking about what are the uses we are making for energy. And I think it's a really good point of pointing out that we had to think outside the box during the last crisis. I think it's a very good example of how fast we can change. We didn't only have the war and the energy crisis, but we also had the pandemic right before that. That also showed us how fast our society can adapt and how good our institutions are into addressing huge challenges. So. Coming back to the 2020, the 22 crisis, I think it really showed us, everybody in this room also actually experienced the fear of blackouts, but also messages from public authorities asking us to save energy, and some very interesting measures that didn't make it to final law. But for example, in Germany, they were actually discussing about banning video advertisements. So these video screen advertisements actually use as much electricity as a 4-people household. This is huge, and also this also illustrates that we need to take into account the fact that our energy system and our energy policies were designed in an era of abundant fossil fuel supply, not only abundant but also cheap, which often goes hand in hand. And now we need to admit that we are entering an era of energy scarcity, be it clean or fossil. And this is why this new topic that has been actually very well highlighted by the other speakers, and Ellen Schrey also from the European Commission, that it's been always discussed, but it hasn't been a top priority. And so we now have a window of opportunity that we absolutely need to use in order to make energy use a top political priority, which isn't the case for now. I think we are now discussing it, but it hasn't made it to, we don't have yet an EU sufficiency directive, for example, which is something that we could also discuss later on.
Well, let me just follow up on what you're saying and then maybe address this question to everybody. You were just highlighting the successful, let's say, efforts during the crisis, right? Like how some of them, how people managed to reduce, how governments were giving messages to people about how they need to reduce their energy consumption. So my question here is, was it the fear, was it the crisis that allowed for that initially to happen? Because as Tina also mentioned, it's not, I quote you, trendy for politicians to ask for people to save energy. Yeah, you want to jump in on that?
No, I mean, definitely, I wanted to finish on one last point that is exactly the question you're raising, and that was also raised by Elena, I think. It's the fact that we need to take into account existing inequalities in terms of energy use, and I think your report shows wonderfully how unequal the carbon footprint is and how unequal the access to energy actually is. And in terms of scarcity, that's also why we've seen a comeback of the state intervention, because if we have limited supply of something, we need to decide politically how we use it and who uses it and to do what. So I think that's something that, because I'm French, as you may hear or guess, but I could be Belgian actually, but so yeah, I mean, I come from a country where we had a yellow vest protests that actually weren't against climate policy per se, because climate policy, as everywhere in Europe, is quite popular in France, but they were against policies that were perceived as socially unequal. And so the very interesting concept with sufficiency is also to think about these distributive aspects of climate policies that will not, we will not achieve the pace required for the transition if we leave people behind. And this is something that also needs to raise into the debate, and that's also why I'm really happy to be here and to discuss this with you.
Thank you for that. And I want to turn to, yes, Helen, I was about to turn to you. I saw you nodding your head a few times. Did you want to add something on what you heard?
Yes, because as I said, we are research, so we try to anticipate, and we are preparing a revision of the SET plan, which is the research and innovation part of the Energy Union. And in this revamping, after long discussions with member states and with ERA, we are proposing a new approach to make this embedding this, looking at the people's needs to make it implemented in reality. For me, involvement of citizen is not only discussion with citizen, it is to take into account in the design of technology and processes the real needs of people. That is exactly what the previous speaker was describing. And for that, we are proposing to create task forces, which will be limited in duration, but will design together with the technology working group, design with them tools for them to begin to implement that through their work. So the idea is to give research and innovation tools, whether guidelines, models, things like that, which will help to take into account some very critical needs of people. The accessibility, the affordability, the health also, the gender discrimination, and in affordability, I also put, for instance, IT literacy, computer literacy. And I'm French too, so the yellow jackets, it's something which hurted us a lot because it came from an increase of the price of fossil fuels, let's say. So we have to think on a concrete way to do it. So the report of ERA for me is very good, but as the speaker said, and then, how do we tackle that? And we have been trying a new approach in the revision of the SET plan, which will be published very soon now. It is on the path to be adopted by the Commission as a Commission communication. So DG Research, the research policy of the EU is paving the way, because one point I would like to make clear is that legislation or regulatory frame is not enough. We need more than that. Usually it comes a little bit for short and medium term, but we need to change in the way we are proposing technologies and to adjust technologies to the needs of people. Doesn't mean we don't work on others, but it means that at least when we want to deliver something for specific objectives, we integrate the social needs. As we did for circularity and sustainability by design, we should have social needs by design.
That's very useful information. So what I'm just going to make sure I understood correctly, that you're saying legislative framework is not enough. There's going to be a revamp of this report where you're going to propose some task force that will give researchers also the tools that are needed to take into account people's needs. So what you were saying is we need to change the way we propose technologies by also looking at what people need. And I think that's an important message. So then to make the link with, again, people on the ground, Guillermo, when you hear that, right, and you think of solutions, what do you think in the, of course, Helen was talking about the long term, but now closer to today and the present time, what kind of actions do you think are needed to advance this agenda on energy reduction?
Yes, thank you. So when we talk about the short term, of course, long term, it requires a systemic view, a change of model, paradigm shift, and so on. So it's more complicated. But when it comes to the short term, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. That's the hope or message with hope. There is already very nice European legislation that is inclusive. One example is the EED recast. Now there is even an article on the Energy Board, for example, to prioritize energy efficiency in the building for these households. So I think very good job is being done at many aspects. Something that we see when we talk a little bit about sufficiency is many governments, local governments primarily, but have been implementing sufficiency policies and schemes for a while already. And I notice here some examples like the car occupancy. In many cities, there is specific tracks or specific lines for people if they take the car with more than, 2 or 3 people. This is sufficiency. It's there. It can be implemented easily, right? In Spain, I'm Spanish, so just to say it as well. Summers are getting hotter even. Last year, there was this ban, basically, or they set a maximum of the cooling degrees, in some public buildings. again, this is sufficiency. We don't need to be at 16 degrees or 17 degrees in summer in a public building, you know. It even pushes you from shopping or whatever you want to do. So there are a lot of things that are out there and need a bit of a structure. And one proposition that could be, I mean, I think is quite realistic and is also covered in a report from the European project Clever, is to set also sufficiency targets in the national energy and climate plans in the NCPs. Right now there is targets for efficiency, but why not for sufficiency as well? There are already policies, as I said, that are in relation to sufficiency, but let's make it a bit more realistic. That would be, for me, already one nice implementation. And another one, I like to touch also on the industry. It's not my topic of expertise, but I think it's key, because we are now seeing our European industry threatened by high energy prices and so on. And demand reduction is definitely a solution. Recycling materials, reusing materials, that can create, not only reduce the demand, but also create a new niche, a new economic niche for opportunities. I think was mentioned today about new technologies on recycling, right? If we manage to do that at the European level, we'll be much more, we're optimizing the use of these raw materials. We wouldn't need to import them from countries very far away, right? So I think this is also a must that I wanted to highlight. And perhaps a last idea is the systemic change. It's also, we need a shift of paradigm that links a bit more to the long term, but we cannot just implement one action. We need to structure one strategy that is to all the countries and Europe at the same time, because it's a little bit of a mindset and everything is interconnected. For example, food intake. We are currently using a lot of meat, and producing meat is very energy and water intensive. So if we can reduce a little bit, for example, the consumption of meat, we are also reducing the consumption of energy and so on. So everything needs to be interconnected. And this is, again, not new, but I think I want to share with you a book that I read a couple of years ago of Donella Meadows, Thinking in Systems. And she explains really, really nice how to create these positive feedback loops. And I think this is key now for our policy system in Europe.
Thank you for that. I think you're offering a holistic view, right, on the solutions, and that's already very helpful. I have a question for Tina again, but before that, I just want to flag to you that we're going to be taking questions also from the audience and people watching online. If you have questions, you can also flag it somehow. I'm sure there's a way. But so just in preparation, just telling you ahead of time. But now that, Tina, that we heard all the different aspects, right, of this debate, I want to kind of take a step back and maybe can you reflect a little bit about where you as a researcher fit in this whole debate, and what do you think it's missing in this interaction between research and policy making, right? Because I think that's also important, a question, and you have experience directly.
Yeah, thank you. We have already heard that we need a lot of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, even cross-disciplinary, many disciplinaries. We need a lot of disciplinary work, and that is something that it's already happening, but we need that even more. But then, if we go to the how to do this, of course we need to do a lot of collaboration. My background is in engineering, but for the last 10 years, I have been mostly worked with social scientists, like psychologists and lawyers. We need to integrate more citizens, which was also heard. That is definitely what we need to. We need to understand people better. But then how to translate that in policies? Then we come to the policy impact analysis, how we are supporting the policymakers. Of course, we know what is happening in each member state. I can only talk in depth from the Finnish side, but we have a long traditions how to do this. In addition, Commission says the framework, how to look at like medium and long-term strategies. So like what kind of framework is there to study these things. But I think that we need to also open this box more. But how to do that? That is the question. We know how to do the integrated assessment modeling. We know how to do different scenario planning, looking at the foresight, those different storylines, and even quantize them. But then when we are going more to the behavior change, we don't have a data for future behavior. So that is most critical thing. So we are modeling and making the assumptions for rational decision making, but how to move forward? We need new methods. We need new data. Typically nowadays we are making questionnaires, but that is just a snapshot for the second. That second, the question is asked. And we can see that this will change in a second when you see TV news like what we have unfortunately seen today and yesterday night, what has happened recently around the world. So these changes are happening all the time. But how to do that? That is the big question mark.
Yeah.
But of course we need more research.
What I hear you say really is like people are really complicated, right? And figuring out human behavior. Yeah, you want to add something?
Yes, of course. Time to time, you can also hear that some people are very simple.
Yeah.
But maybe that is not true. But of course, we are not able to make any forecasts.
Right.
We can maybe only like make a different risk analysis, be prepared for different futures. We can figure out what is our desirable future, try to convince people, policymakers to move the same direction. So it's a lot about also the communication. And especially as an engineering scenario modeler, for the policymakers, we have a lot to do with the communication. How to really present our results for a large group of audience so that people really understand our messages. And because things are really complicated.
Just want to pass the floor quickly to Camille, who wants to add on this.
Well, very shortly, because I think it really builds on your points and your previous points as well. So I think there is a key element with communication, but we also need to think beyond that. And I just wanted to mention that the Jacques Delors Institute is working together with Negawatt on a full-fee project, so Horizon 2020 project. So we will issue recommendations on sufficiency, but we also work with the Fraunhofer Institute, who actually showed comparing the results of citizen assemblies in several European countries. So deliberative democracy experiences on climate policy making. And so comparing the results of citizens deciding on what to do on climate with the national energy and climate plans, they showed a great discrepancy between citizens actually having the space to debate among themselves, but also with experts, and they were much more in favor of sufficiency and regulation. So I think there's also a discrepancy between what citizens and other stakeholders actually want, like clean businesses, but also municipalities, as you rightly highlighted, that are willing to take action, but don't have necessarily the decision-making power or the tools, because we actually have a very ambitious EU climate and energy framework, but now it will come to implementation. And we are already hearing voices against the fact that it is going to be challenging, and it is right. The financial resources in member states are very unevenly spread. Member states can also lack technical means, but also human resources. And so this is also why we are going to publish a report with the Jacques Delors Institute by the end of this month, or maybe early next month, highlighted 3 key levers to think about for the next European Commission. The first one is democracy, the second one is governance, and the third one is financing. And so with these 3 tools, we think we can also address the upcoming social and political backlash that we are going to face in the coming months and potentially years. And we need more regulation, but unless we address these things, it's going to be really challenging. And so very happy also to hear that the SET plan is going to include a very innovative task force involving citizens, because I think this is really the way we need to go.
That's great, and great that you're...
Sorry, or I misunderstood what you said, maybe.
Yes, if you allow me, the task forces are not involving citizens. The task forces are involving experts together with implementation working group to design tools. I mean, involving citizens is done, for instance, through the Mission on Cities, which is proposing a lot of this gathering of ideas and working together. So it's more linked to governance. What we are trying is to add another layer, which is to train in a way or to help the member states, the national authorities, to gather with the scientists to think on the citizens' need, and not only to discuss, but to do something concrete in their research. The same we did for circularity, where we now impose in any of our topics on energy to do a life cycle assessment at each step, or in the technology infrastructure we do the same. So it's a change in the way we look at technologies. If we produce something which, as an old lady discovering IT only when I was 20 years old, I cannot use with a lot of facility, this is a bad technology. It's as simple as that. Because we always think on use, but don't forget that the share of the 50 plus people, this is the biggest share of voting people. So the risk is not that we don't satisfy the needs, the risk is populism, if we exclude part of the population. So what I mean is that one thing is communication, and we have the missions for that, and we need, I agree with you, we need to develop a lot on that. But the second is to give the tools to implement. And the third is indeed the funding and the way to implement together with people. But don't forget the technology. Don't forget that it's not only for a long run, it's now that we need to train the scientists that, okay, if they want to develop something totally erratic, fine. Research should be innovative. But if we need some technologies, we need them to match all the people's needs and not only a segment of the population. That's what we mean. And for that, we need really to train innovators, to train cities, to train researchers, but also authorities. And we should not fund things which are just for a small part of the population. This is either basic research or implementing research. And on implementing research, when I see too often things which are just not adjusted. They're not adjusted to women's needs or to old people's needs or to young people's needs. Let me give you an example which is totally stupid, but maybe speaking to the mind. Try, when you are old and you don't have a lot of mobility in your hands, to take out, to unplug an electric cable or to plug it. It's to protect kids. Fine. What about elderly? What about disabled people? Can't we find another way of protecting kids which is not disabling another segment of the population? Because all the electric plugging now are on the same model. And of course, as many women, I take my shoes and I hammer it because it doesn't enter. It's a stupid example, but it speaks to the people because they face that in their life. Sorry, I was a bit passionate, but
no, this is great.
Dealing with citizens is important.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say, I think this conversation is getting really interesting, and then examples, especially personal examples, are always, that extra touch, so that's good. But I am getting messages that we're coming to an end, and I do want to take some questions from people. So do we have questions? We have a question in the back there, and I'm going to ask you please to introduce yourself as well and have a brief question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, citizens. My name is Angelos Charlaftis, Epaphos Advisors. We represent always the EcoWaves movement, a pan-European and Mediterranean movement, which is based in direct democracy, in science, and in ecology. I'm expressing today the scientific part of ours, which is increasing all around Europe, because speaking of stupidity has given to the population to be stupid. if we see it and we speak for mental health. The thing is that our movement is speaking for the reduction of the of course, the energy consumption, which is a logical thing according to the terminology of economy. If we research the word economy on the ancient origin of it, not of the today use of the word, and we always say that we cannot achieve these targets which are given by these authorities of the globalists about the climate change indexes because it is an illusion.
Can I ask you please to ask your question?
The question is this: even though we want a reduction which cannot be achieved, actually, in the ways of the policies that are followed, we believe that can be achieved with other policies. Do you really believe that can we achieve the indexes which are requested by these administrations for the climate change policies? Thank you very much.
So the question was, can we achieve our goals? Yes, Tina.
Well, I will take again the example from Finland. What has happened really is that if we put climate first, of course we have the EU policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And what has really happened, if we look at the statistics, is that our greenhouse gases are really, really going down. It is now implemented in our law that coal has to be phased out during the summer 2029. And also we are expecting that the phasing out all the fossils in energy are more or less by the 30s or at the 2035 at the latest phased out. Of course, the Ukraine war made it happen that even the natural gas has been more or less phased out. But then we come to the tricky questions that what is the cost of greenhouse gas mitigation? I'm not talking only about cost in euros, but what is the cost for materials, biodiversity, and so on. And then we come to the tricky question. If we look at the net greenhouse gas emissions. But of course, when we are moving to the global, then of course we should have like a global agreements. We have these kind of agreements to go moving towards Paris Agreement. But of course, we can see that the change should be like a more radical. So in that sense, we have really, really a big challenge ahead. But in certain countries, I believe that we are able to do that. But of course, global context, we need to do much more. And then we come to the justice questions and how to help the vulnerable countries and so on.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anybody? Camille, you wanna wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to highlight the fact that indeed we absolutely need much more collective action than what we've seen so far. It means more collective action at the European level, but also at the local level, and more cooperation between all these levels of governance, but also horizontally across stakeholders, so more public, private, civil society collaborations to find solutions in a very uncertain context where we don't really know what's going to happen and how the change can take place.
Great, thank you. Actually, that's a good way to wrap it up. I think it gives us that boost for the end. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists for being here. And we're going to take a little break right now and then be right back. Thank you so much.
Okay. Can I ask you just to take a seat? We're going to start again for the second part of this meeting. Okay, so the second part of the meeting is we'll be focusing on the second report that we are releasing today, which is about critical raw materials. And I will make this time a very short introduction because we're running late with the agenda. So I think it's very important when we speak about critical raw materials to have a global perspective of what is happening from a geopolitical perspective. And I will here not speak, unfortunately, of all what is happening on the military side, which is very frightening and which has, of course, which will have consequences regarding our supply lines in many respects. But maybe the key message of this slide is just to say that Europe has been really constructed with the concept of the world which was opening, which would become more and more borderless with free trade. And this is, by the way, why we have externalized so much of our strategic activities elsewhere. Today, we found ourselves very much a hostage of the trade war between the United States and China. And unfortunately, this is not only a trade war, it's much more comprehensive in terms of a fight for domination than just trade. But certainly on the from a trade perspective, we are, on the one hand, extremely linked with the United States for strategic and historical reasons, but at the same time, we are extremely linked and dependent on China. And so this is a very difficult balancing act for EU, especially when the EU is attempting to develop its strategic autonomy. So strategic autonomy is a concept I will not develop here, which is quite complex. It's very vaguely defined, but it's basically trying as much as possible to keep our ability to decide for ourselves about our acts. Now, if we look at our dependency on China, we have, of course, a lot of dependency to other countries. But just on China, I want to highlight, and this is not only about critical minerals, it's a general trade dependency. If we look at the key technologies for the clean energy transition, and these are all technologies which were mentioned, which are key technologies in the Net Zero Industry Act. First of all, if we look at PV, and this one is really a pity because I remember 15 years ago when the PV was developed mainly in Europe, and Europe was a main producer of PV, not the only one, but the main producer of PV, and it was by far the biggest market at the time. In just 3 years' time, the complete PV industry went from Europe to China between 2008 and 2011. And if you look at PV, which is one of the core technologies on which our clean energy transition relies, all the critical steps of the PV production are a Chinese monopoly. We're talking about the wafers and the PV cells in particular, where their share of production is more than 90%. It means that our ability to deploy at the rate where we want to deploy PV, and you know this is very ambitious, is totally dependent on our ability to secure these supplies from China at a reasonable price. If we look at wind, it's another story. Out of the 10 top PV wind power manufacturer, 4 are European and the others are Chinese. And what is really frightening at the moment is although the wind industry in Europe is probably leading in many respects from a technological and a scientific perspective, we see the beginning of the same phenomenon happening with wind as we have seen for PV. The Chinese manufacturers are entering into the market and competing with prices which are sometimes half the price of the the European wind turbines. And the wind industry in Europe is making gigantic losses at the moment. So we are again having the risk of losing our wind manufacturing industry. Third is the batteries. We know the stories about batteries. There it's a little bit more mixed, but still 60% of the batteries we import for electrical vehicles in Europe come from China. And then this brings us to the core of the subject, which is critical raw materials. And so the graph is a graph from the IEA, the role of critical minerals in clean energy transition. It's a 2-year-old report. Many things to say here. First of all, if you look at the left-hand side, you see what happens in terms of extraction. So where the resources are being extracted. And the top level shows, in fact, the concentration of fossil fuels for the 3 top producers. And you see, in fact, that the 3 top producers of oil and gas represent much less of the total supply than the critical minerals below: copper, nickel, cobalt, rare earths, and lithium. It means that critical minerals are much more concentrated geographically than our fossil fuels, and hence that the potential dependency will be much more tricky. Now, this is one part of the story. What is even more frightening is that we don't use directly the ores. What we use are the processed ores. And China has taken already for the last 15 years a leadership on processing the ores and bringing then the materials themselves. And you see that China is leading many of these critical minerals and sometimes having almost a monopoly. If we take a rare earth, China is processing approximately 90% of the world production of rare earth, which is huge. Europe imports 98% of its rare earths from China. And rare earths are those materials which are critical for permanent magnets, who are used in the engines of electric vehicles and, of course, in wind turbines. So huge dependency. Then the last part is what is the forecast from the IEA in terms of how the demand will grow on these different elements, taking the benchmark of 2020 and looking at what would be the consumption in 2040 in the execution of the net zero scenario. And you see that these are multiplied by 7, 40, 20. Just to realize that this is heavy industry with extremely capital intensive industry with very long cycle times. So there are two messages key here. First of all, it will be extremely difficult for Europe and for anyone else, by the way, to get back into the competition because this is extremely long cycle times. If we think about the mining deposit which were discovered in the north of Sweden, they will probably come online within 10 to 15 years at the best. So long cycle time, but it will be extremely difficult also in terms of capability because simply when you have a quasi-monopoly, you can force out all the other competitors just by playing with the prices. And we know that this is what China is doing. So we have an immense dependency. And when we speak about strategic autonomy, we need to keep in mind all these dependencies I've shown in the previous slide. The report, I will not present the key concept of the report, just what are the different subjects which are addressed. Of course, there is a large part which is about looking at the risk and the global context of CRMs. Then we look into circular economy, and this is a concept which is, everybody speaks about it, but I think it's very interesting, first of all, to understand to what extent what is really circular economy. It introduces the notion of the 9R ladder, so there is much more than what people think in terms of possibilities to make things circular. But on the other hand, it also shows that there is a lot of limitations in circular economy and that it is totally wrong to believe that we'll be able to run circularly even in a world which is not growing, but certainly even more in a world which is in growth mode. And that introduces the need for the third chapter, which is essential. And there is where research is absolutely fundamental. It's about looking for substitution of these critical minerals, alternative materials, and materials efficiency. So how we can reduce, either replace or reduce the use of these critical minerals, which is essential from a strategic perspective, but also, of course, in terms of management of the planetary resources. We then dive into 5 of the key technologies of the NZIA: solar PV, wind, hydrogen, batteries, and power electronics, which we often forget. And the report ends with policy recommendation, of which I will present the headlines here. First of all, of course, promoting a circular economy approach, but in the widest sense of what circular economy is. Then scale up significantly the investment in research and innovation across all TRLs, and this is very much about material efficiency, material substitution, alternative materials. And then the 2 others are really about all the ethical aspects and environmental aspects, sustainability aspects of mining and extraction. So on the one hand, we need to ensure that the number of standards are respected, but by doing so, we need also to protect the urban economy from unfair competition, which in the case of critical raw materials is of course absolutely essential. And finally, and this goes without saying, it's strategically increased international collaboration. It sounds a little bit at odds with what is happening in the world at the moment, and this is something we need to fight every day to realize, because without collaboration, there is no answer to the climate crisis we're facing, but also to the other crises that we are facing all today. So this will be my introduction for now, and I will again invite Anca Gorzu, who will be moderating this panel, which will be a highly virtual panel. But Anca, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you, thank you. We're back with our second panel, and I'm already going to please invite Sako to join me on stage. She's the only one that's here today. Everyone else is online. So I'm just going to introduce everyone, make sure our connections is good before we get going. But in this panel, the second panel of today's conference, after this great presentation that laid the scene on critical raw materials, we will be looking at the challenges and opportunities in securing a stable and a sustainable supply of materials for Europe's clean energy sector. So next to me, I have Sako Nakamae, who is researcher at CEA, the French research organization. Online, hope everyone is there, we have Daniel Kios, am I pronouncing it correctly? Perfect. Policy officer with DG GROW, with the focus on energy-intensive industries, raw materials, and hydrogen at the Commission, of course. We have Philippe Jacques, I see you, Philippe, Managing Director for EMIRI, the Energy Materials Industrial Research Initiative. And we also have Reinhilde Voigelers, Senior Fellow with Bruegel. So hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? If you want to just wave, great. Perfect. Yes, everyone's good. I want to start with Daniel and kind of start with a big picture question. In this year's State of the Union address, we heard Commission President von der Leyen. She talked about critical raw materials in that address and obviously emphasized the need to enhance supply security in Europe. As we know and we've heard, these materials are crucial in wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, electrolyzers, and we're also in the midst of a global clean tech race, right? As we saw from the previous presentation, our dependence on China is huge. In this context, can you tell me a little bit what role the European Commission sees for research and innovation, right, in addressing this pressing challenge? We cannot hear you. Cannot.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Great.
Yes?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Perfect, very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for inviting me, and many thanks for your flexibility for today's online participation. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you today, but at least we managed to have an online participation. So once again, thank you for allowing this. Going directly to the question, research and innovation is an important element of generally the Commission's policies. While starting to prepare the Horizon Europe Framework Program for Research and Innovation 2018 and 19 and 2020, our thinking about research innovation was very clear that it should contribute to the EU's policy objectives. So this is how we created the first two work programs, 21-22 and 23-24, having this in mind. This allowed us also, well, we organized ourselves internally to have a co-creation process with other DGs and able to make sure that all the policy priorities are well taken on board. And this was also including raw materials and particularly critical raw materials. And the role of research innovation in raw materials, I think it's really crucial to secure and diversify the sourcing, both from primary raw materials and also secondary raw materials. Research and innovation provides us with all the new technologies in order to provide better exploration, also using Earth observation technologies and drones for identifying and further assessing the potential of raw materials underground. It provides us better technologies for extraction of raw materials, including new technologies for deeper drilling, but also reducing the emissions, reducing the energy usage, reducing the water and reducing water, but also reducing emissions and other things like noise or dirt coming from open pit mines. So this is another element. We also look for technologies for processing, for refining of raw materials, limiting the emissions here as well, but also allowing better, more efficient process refining of different elements that we have. And also on the recycling side, so allowing technologies for recycling of new devices like batteries, like permanent magnets and wind turbines. And we devote a lot of funding for this purpose. We have been doing this already in the past. In Horizon 2020, we had around 600 million euros devoted for R&I projects in raw materials, and we had around 89, if I remember correctly, projects. Most of them are still running, finishing this or next year or in next 2 years' time. So it takes a lot of time from the when you look at from the programming stage of the calls to the projects to be finished and actually deployed. It's 5, 6, or even 10 years period. So we have to be patient here. But this was the past. In Horizon Europe, we have devoted 470 million for projects. This is for projects from 21, 22 that have been already selected and are ongoing. And this also includes the calls for proposals for 23, 24. The projects for 23, they have been already evaluated, and now we are, the executive agency is performing the grant agreement preparation with the selected projects, and applications are now open till, I think it's February, beginning of February, for the calls for 2024. So this is where we stand in terms of the Horizon Europe program. Mm-hmm. And maybe I can stop here.
Yeah.
At this point,
well, I mean, I think you outlined, a variety of steps in which research and innovation, features into your work, from how it can be useful from mining, and finding the deposits to processing. But then maybe I want to jump straight into Sacco because you heard that there's a lot of financing, money that was a promise for a variety of projects. When you hear that, what's because you work on the ground, like you put this into practice. What's your reaction to what you heard, and how do you find that research and innovation plays a role today in the work that you're doing with the critical raw materials and the security of supply? I think it's on. Yes,
it's on. Thank you. So I like to start out by saying that the critical raw materials, they are critical, or they're considered critical because of their particular capabilities, either that is a physical, chemical, or mechanical, that these certain elements can deliver that the other materials can't. And we find them in all sorts of high-tech technologies, renewable energies. Then with this current dynamic of going forward with digitalization or clean energy transition, we need more of these materials, oftentimes showing up in the form of, say, semiconductors. Right? And in order for the Net Zero Industrial Act, they say clearly that we need to depend on the technologies that do not exist yet. And all of this points us to saying for the critical raw materials, either we find more of them, because we need more of these technologies. Because when we say technology, it sounds kind of abstract, but in fact, what we're talking about is the devices or the machines. If we want digital, we need data storage, we need computers, we need processors. And if it's a renewable energy, then we need solar panels, we need batteries. So we're talking about things. And in those things, we have the critical raw materials. And either we find more mining, that leaves the area of research, of course, or we reduce the use or dependence. And that's where the research comes in, of course. And there are substitution materials. Let's focus on energy because that's the only thing I know. There are some promising materials like perovskites for solar panels. Could be sodium-ion batteries, maybe vanadium redox flow batteries for the energy storage. So there are candidates that exist, but they do reach certain level of TRL thanks to all the national and international research funding, as well as certain investments from industries, and it's advancing. Then we hit the bottleneck of going into from, say, TRL 4 to 5 to the mass commercial deployment. And in fact,
and TRL, just for the audience, is the
technology readiness level. It shows how if the concept has been formulated, then it's only TRL 01. If it has been tested in the lab context, then it's 3. If it has been tested in a realistic condition, and yada, yada, yada. And iPhone is probably TRL 9. So that's how it goes. And from going from, say, the lab scale prototype, the functions, to the one that you can replicate. Reproducibility is very important. If 2 out of 10 doesn't work, then it's not marketable. So going with the historical studies that I've read somewhere, that out of all the new materials that are being searched, and we need to expand our pool of new materials for sure, but only 2% of them actually make it to products. And the average timing that happens is between 10 and 15 years. In the case of lithium-ion batteries, I read somewhere that it had taken almost 20 years. And we don't have that kind of time. 2030 is just around the corner, and we're relying on this new technology that do not exist, and we really need to accelerate. And then, so they, in at least material science point of view, for searching for new materials and putting these materials into devices, there has been sort of a paradigm change in the way we do our research, which is called materials acceleration platforms, that uses all sorts of the novel numerical technologies and automation and robotics, and that can combine that I find that, but in order to have those material acceleration platforms to function, we need lots of data. So we need support on developing the data management projects, for example. I know that there are some, and there are several at European level that tackle this. So I think there is a mutual understanding and dialogue between the research community, at least from what I see for the material science. We always wish that there are more, for sure, because there are many possibilities. But then the calls that we see in Horizon Europe, at least from my perspective, in all honesty, there is a correspondence. I just personally wish that there are more, so that we don't miss out on the new technologies. And also that I think I know that Europe has made certain choices on the priority technologies. And there are European projects, and I'll come to that probably later, but I wish I could see more is the involvement of more national level incentives, which is not just echoing what Europe says, but slightly more adapted to the local priorities. But I think I'll have an opportunity to come back to that later.
So the national level incentives, will come back to that. I think it's also interesting you are pointing out that we are betting our clean energy future on a lot of technologies that, it's not that they don't exist, but they're like at the nascent level and not yet commercially viable, and we're getting there. And that we don't have time, right? Like to really, we need to move much faster than we are. And
yes, I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is a research priorities and the innovation priorities that is suitable for resolving certain local challenges. And then there is Europe or international level, which has to tackle at the higher level of the challenges. So the European calls, Horizon Europe, from my point of view, calls for, is aligned with that. The international, the large scale, that's at least my personal, it doesn't represent my employer or anybody, my take. So sometimes there is that, in French, décalage, the gap between the international priority, the global priority, and then more targeted, attainable research projects which can be provided by the national level. And that is...
There's a gap there.
Yeah, there is a gap which is normal, but there, to my mind, if there is missing, it's the national level.
Well, let's come back to that a bit later. I think that's a good point. I just want to turn now to Philippe and kind of get your take to see what you can complement or add based on what you've heard from, of course, Emiri's perspective on the role that research and innovation can play in securing this supply chain of critical raw materials for Europe. Oh, cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Yeah, sorry, someone has to forget to unmute. It's me today. So first, thank you very much for having me with you today, and also from my side, sorry not to have been able to come physically in Brussels, but we were also recommended to work from home, which is a bit, okay, that's a precautionary measure that I understand, and so I had to stick to that. Well, I think a lot was said already in the nice introduction by Adel, by what Daniel mentioned already, and also what Sako elaborated on. I think that, well, from Emiri point of view, indeed we need to address the critical raw materials value chain by really further developing mining, processing activities to make them more sustainable and more in line really with the EU criteria that we want really to respect from an environmental point of view or from a labor point of view, for example. So there is a lot to do still to really to avoid this NIMBY syndrome that we are facing a lot in Europe. So that's one of the issue. The activities we are more focusing on Emery side is much more on the downstream activities below or downstream really the critical raw material themselves by focusing on activities dealing with what we call advanced materials. So these advanced materials are really the components or the compounds which are really elaborated by processing and really by designing on purpose really the elaborated composition that will really deliver the looked for properties and features in the different components that will be assembled in the different technologies. So that's definitively where we see a lot of activities, and I think that's also what was really mainly targeted already by SACO, really developing further tools and really activities on the development of these advanced materials. We see these advanced materials really being one of the definitely not the only one, but one of the contributing solutions really to reduce the pressure and the dependency on critical raw materials by really first by substituting CRMs or by reducing really the intensity of embedded CRMs into the different technologies, but also by contributing to the development of viable alternative technologies. Just to mention one, in batteries, for example, we now see batteries sodium-based, sodium-ion-based batteries, which are definitely not facing the same issues regarding raw material that the one we have with lithium. Definitively, these sodium-ion batteries will not be a totally substituting solution or an alternative solution to every use of lithium-ion batteries, but they will at least be able to provide solution that will really reduce really the need and the demand for lithium. So they will contribute really to reducing our dependency on lithium, for example. What we need also to do, and this was also, I think, this quite obvious, and this was already mentioned by the previous speakers, is that we need really to work on a solution that will really allow to increase really the collection, the reuse, and the recycling of critical raw materials, notably by developing really in-depth knowledge of the material flows, so that really we're able to trace where the materials are in the different products which are on the market, which are in use, so that we can better anticipate and we can better recover and capture again these materials at the end of use of the products. We need also to develop further recycling technologies that will be also more technologically mature, so that really we increase really the recycling rate of the different critical raw materials. And of course, we need also to be able to incorporate more secondary critical raw materials into the production of new advanced materials. These secondary critical raw materials sometimes don't have exactly the same properties or the same level of purity than the primary raw materials. So this one will also generate some difficulties really in allowing us to close the loop and to go really for this for these circular value chains. And of course, there is also a need to develop a consistent circular approach so that really from the design of the material up to the design of the product that will be incorporating these materials, and then at the end to the dismantling and recycling phase, there will be really the possibility to have a circular product design that really will allow for the easy replacement of parts during service, but also to the reuse or the repair of the components, and at the end also to an easy dismantling and sorting for an appropriate recycling. So all these need a lot of additional R&I efforts. And not only R&I, I think that what is important, you mentioned, Anker, the fact that President von der Leyen mentioned critical raw materials in the speech of the Union earlier this month or last month, I forgot. There was also in the letter of intent that was published by President von der Leyen on really the follow-up of this declaration. There is one of the about 20 priorities for the Commission, which is entitled Advanced Materials for Industrial Leadership. And so this one is really, I think, very important really to contribute to the issue or the challenges we are facing with critical raw materials. It's not only about critical raw materials, but definitively, and that was highlighted by Adele in the introductory part, that we are today too much dependent on really China, especially not only for critical raw materials, but also for the downstream activities and for different components which are important in these technologies. And that's definitely something that we need to address now. And I will stop just by mentioning that also in the communication that was issued by the Commission together with the Critical Raw Materials Act, there is an announcement that the Commission will be elaborating a coordinated plan with the member states on advanced materials, which I think is also very much aligned with what I saw in the chat of the Zoom session today, that you were really proposing really to have this task force really to associating experts with member states under the set plan really on some cross-cutting issues. And I think advanced materials is probably one of the driving lines that can really also be used really to elaborate on these activities dealing with sustainability and circularity. And I will stop here for the time being.
Okay, thank you. I think you did a good job to comprehensively, focus not just on the solutions, that we have, but also you laid out a lot of what's coming on advanced materials from the EU side. So anyone in the room interested on that, now you have all the information, so that's really good. But now let's kind of zoom out a bit, and I want to bring Reinhilde in here. We heard a lot about more of the solutions, the on-the-ground options for how we can, reuse, recycle, substitute critical raw materials. But if we zoom out a bit and look again at the EU level, my question for you would be, as we know, the Critical Raw Materials Act is currently in trialogue negotiations in the EU. It's going to set the scene for the EU's next steps and how it wants to secure that supply chain. I wonder what your thoughts are on this direction that the EU is taking. What are you looking out for in how these negotiations are playing out? And what are some of the challenges that you think Europe is facing in reducing its dependency on players like China?
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, I also need to apologize for not being able to make it personally for the same kind of reasons as the previous speakers here. So if what we see is that fit for purpose, then I think the first question is what is actually the purpose that we're aiming for here? And I think it's very important to recognize the multidimensionality of the purposes. We're looking for decarbonization, but also at the same time economic growth, activities that give us competitiveness, world market markets, gives us jobs, gives us resilience, gives us security of supply, also social cohesion, strategic autonomy. So many objectives here, which are not always aligned here. So we will also regularly face trade-offs. For instance, and particularly how to balance this strategic autonomy, at what cost of decarbonization, and how much are we willing to give up in terms of efficiency and effectiveness to get that strategic autonomy here. So clearly not an easy issue here, but I think this panel also made it very clear that in order to deal with these challenges here, we really will need the innovation machine, new technologies to be created and deployed here, because it's particularly the innovation machine which will help us to deliver on these objectives here, but very often also simultaneously, because new technology solutions can actually deliver at the same time this decarbonization, but also substituting for the dependency of older technologies here, while at the same time avoiding new dependencies here. But also because innovation really builds on very complex knowledge advantages that companies have. It also allows to capture value from these innovation activities on world markets here, provided that, of course, IP can properly be appropriated here. So the innovation machine, I think, is really very important to deal with these multidimensionalities here and to be able to, at the best possible way, to combine decarbonization with strategic autonomy and still building competitiveness here. But of course, at the same time, we then need to avoid that we become also technology dependent here. So if the innovation machine is so important, we also need to have technology resilience here and technology autonomy here. And the way to translate that is that we need to be sufficiently mastering the technologies to create, so all the knowledge that you need to create new technologies and new innovations here, and to adopt existing technologies as well here. So that's also very important. And I think sometimes we focus too much on, we cannot be dependent on certain critical components, but I think we very much more importantly need to monitor whether we are still also mastering all the different areas in the innovation landscape here to make sure that we keep our innovation machine sufficiently autonomous here. So the next question then is so we agree that we need the innovation machine, and it's very critical here, but can we take it for granted that we will get these innovations here? And there I think the answer is clearly no, even for very well-developed innovation countries like the US and China. Even there, these cannot be strong enough to deliver us these innovations and on time. So we need policy to drive that innovation machine here. And that policy then needs, first of all, a mix of policy instruments. So it's not just about how much money do we put in that, how much subsidies here, but it's a whole mix of policy instruments that we will need. We will need carbon pricing, we will need regulations, we will need targets setting together with subsidies here. Second important component is that this policy will need to be much more directed towards these goals here, climate change goals and others here, way more than a purely horizontal approach that we have been using or are using in other areas here. So way more targeting with a mix of policy instruments here, but of course targeting then runs the risk that you're picking the wrong winners here, and for that it's very important that you have a very good balance between how you target and also having enough bottom-up support for and horizontal frameworks here with enough competition of new technologies and new groups to be able to enter here. So then the next question is, do we, with the current policy, do we have the necessary policy instruments to guide our innovation machine here? I think in the end, the key KPI that we need to evaluate whether we have the right kind of policy is how successful is our policy in leveraging private investments in these technologies and new technologies that we need here. So what we traditionally had, and I think Europe was actually pretty good at this compared to for instance, the US here, we really had this policy mix. We had carbon pricing with the ETS here, although could be more ambitious here, but at least we were front runner in that. We have very good regulations, and we also were not too bad in subsidies for this year. But I'm way more worried by the recent trends that we see now, particularly as a reaction to the IRA and with the Net Zero Industry Act, because our policy instruments now are going to, first of all, way more targeting here of picking technologies in the Net Zero Industry Act. But of course, then the question is, which technology did you not pick? And they become basically text if all the others, their competitors, are being targeted here. We've talked already about recycling and the importance of this. Well, it's not one of the targeted Net Zero Industry Acts here. So other technologies also are not necessary. And particularly also the targeting goes towards technologies that are already with high TRLs here. So the very early stage technologies are not selected. And I think that's also a bit problematic here, because it's particularly these new emerging technologies that need way more support here, because there are way more failures in markets here to get these very early stage high risk technologies sufficiently pushed here, and not focusing enough on them is definitely, I think, an issue to worry about.
Reinhilde, let me just quickly interrupt. So you're saying that you are concerned about the fact that there is this targeted approach towards technologies. It shouldn't be this way? It should be much more...
So it should be targeted, but targeted much more in terms of what are the goals that we want to have. So really set the missions. What are the goals we want in terms of decarbonization, strategic autonomy, but not picking technologies here. Any technology that can deliver these goals, that's what we should be looking for here, and not exclude any of these. So the targeting should be way more in terms of objectives, but technology neutral here in that respect.
Okay.
Any technology that can develop it.
Let me give the floor to Daniel here, because I think it would be interesting to get your reaction to this point, especially since there's a bunch of legislation now that's being negotiated that is targeting these technologies. And are you okay? We see you. Yeah, what's your reaction on what you just heard?
Yes, thank you. No, very interesting discussion indeed. I think, if I remember correctly, when we started discussing the batteries regulation and a bit before that, in 2018-19, the approach then was to be technology neutral, at least in a way, not to choose specific cathode compositions, right? So the choice was, of course, the batteries as moving forward, but we did not go into details of what type of batteries. And I think when we discuss technologies now, we won't go further than what has been currently identified under NZIA and what was just mentioned in these meetings today. So in a way, the Commission's approach is to be technology neutral in a sense of not going into details of technologies, but as you can see, of course, we are looking at specific areas in general where we look for solutions that could be implemented and supported further by our instruments available. So this is my quick reaction to this point.
But you're still nevertheless identifying net zero industry technologies and projects, right? So it is targeting.
Daniel is nodding. Okay, it is. We all know it is. There's a big battle over which technologies are going to make it on that. On that list.
And that's particularly then also if you tie that to the fact that there is also much more emphasis on already sufficiently high TRL types of technologies to support and projects here, that really goes again, makes it much more difficult for these very early stage technologies here, which actually may be the breakthroughs of the future here, and which might also, and typically needs also support from policy here. So for me, it's also avoiding that we actually have too much support for already established networks and technologies as well.
Well, I want to link what you're saying, the fact that there is no support for this early stage technologies, to what Sako was saying earlier about some things missing at the national level. So I wonder if these incentives don't come from the EU level, right, to incentivize action on the national level, is that kind of like a detriment for this early stage, let's say, technologies that need a boost?
My personal answer would be, to some extent, yes, at least the examples that I see. Because for example, the material acceleration platform that I have spoken about, that relies on having a huge set of data and then accelerating the material into devices. So it's at a much higher level to start with. And that it can be done at the larger scale, European scale, for example. But when it comes to this fundamental science, it's not there yet. These new science or new materials, and those are not suitable probably for the material acceleration platform, because there's just simply not enough data set to make the AI, the machine learning to function. So therefore, the fundamental science can be done at local level, expert building of the individual labs, and you don't need to create a European collaboration for this. It's actually even detrimental in a sense that by forcing the individual labs who are working on very fundamental material science, I strictly speaking for material science, and experimental, then transferring one sample from one country to another takes time and things can go wrong. It'll be much more efficient if it can be done at the local level, so at a much lower cost. So I think but nevertheless, the national funding source will align with the policy of European level. So they shouldn't be tackling the same, even at the application industrial level. But I insist that it's personally, I think the fundamental, the early stage, not even technology, but early stage material discovery, these research can rely more on the national funding than perhaps European, and that might actually be more effective.
I understand. So they're kind of connected, but not really. The local level can still do its own.
Local, but national. Not
yeah.
local. Local is another thing.
Anyone else want to add anything to that perspective? Yes, Philippe. Oh, it's still muted. We cannot hear you.
Is it working now?
Yep.
Okay. So sorry. I was really willing to build and to support Sacco's point. I think that indeed the fundamental research is definitively where the member states can easily support really research centers and universities. But I think that they have also a very important role to play when it will be about really at the higher TRL level, so really on the industry, innovation uptake, I would say, starting from maybe TRL 7 up to really the first demonstration, where there are really important needs also for infrastructures and investment supports on these demonstrators. I think that the member states and the regions could really or have to take an important role because we need to have really this infrastructure that I think are more easily funded and supported by national stakeholders than by the European Commission, except maybe on the very high-level research infrastructure that we don't want to duplicate from one country to another. But otherwise, I think that it really made sense to have a strong connection between member states and European policies by having really, let's say, the European policy, the European level that can really more act a little bit of the flagship and really guiding and identifying what are really the main battles that we need to conduct. And just to build on what Ranilde was saying before, I think that we cannot conduct battles on everything. So we need to make choices. And I fully support your point that it should be technology neutral, and that really we need to tackle more and to have causes which are driven by challenges than by focusing on certain technologies. But I think that we need, nevertheless, to select really our battles and so to choose which fields we want to de-risk and where really we need to have these activities. So what I wanted to insist also in the context of advanced materials, Daniel mentioned that there is an ongoing project, a proposal for a new partnership on raw materials. There is another one which is also under preparation on advanced materials, which is in the list of the 10 proposals for new R&I partnership under Horizon Europe that was released by the Commission in July. So this one is named Innovative Materials for Europe. And definitively what we want to tackle in this one is exactly also all this coordination about how to better govern data and really to orchestrate really the coordination at the European level on really all the let's say the ambitious tools that will really allow to accelerate the development of materials, and that's not focused only on the field of critical raw materials or the field of energy. It's much more transversal than that, and really addressing all the different strategic markets that are really very important for Europe. But definitively, this one will be also supporting really the goals that you have been talking today.
That's great. Thank you for that. We're heading towards the end of the panel, so I want to check already if there's any questions from the audience here or online. Does anyone have questions at this moment? No questions. One thing that I wanted to come back to was in the original presentation, that chart that was showing us, it was from the International Energy Agency from a report a couple of years ago that was showing I'm a visual learner, so for me it was very striking to see on the chart on the right that showed the strong dependence we have with China for basically the refining and the processes of these materials, and obviously that's a big concern. That's kind of like a lot of the background when we're discussing in this panel as well. So one of the questions, perhaps, Sako, if I can bring you back to the work you're doing, how long do you think, or how feasible? How long will it take, let's say, for Europe to really get in a position where we would be less dependent or autonomous in that way, which was, another word that was circulating today, considering some of these gaps you're mentioning, right, between the funding, the different levels. So if we look at the challenge and then the work you're doing on the ground, like how realistic and how long will it take to get there? Big question. Actually, I'll pose that to everybody.
Forever.
Forever. Okay.
I think that there are many things from researchers' point of view that we can do and tandem with the policies, whether we create a codependency with China, for example, that they need something from us and we get something from them. I just don't see the way things are going that we'll be able to replace critical raw materials or rare earth or strategic raw materials comes from that country to go to zero. That seems that it's impossible.
Right.
In my mind, it is impossible. There are things we can do. Recycling, for example, I think that's one of the things that certain European labs and technologies, they excel in. Hydrogen, it's one of the things that Europe is probably leading.
Mm-hmm.
So we can make an advancement and we can reduce, but to become autonomous, I am very pessimistic.
Anyone else want to take a stab at that question?
Well,
Daniel, Reinhilde,
I'm a bit more optimistic.
Okay, that's good.
Yes, by nature. I think that so dependency, the best way to deal with dependency, we will always be dependent on something, is actually to have the capacity to diversify, to walk away and try something else here, to switch here, and to use more technologies and solutions that are more modular, that allow you to switch here. And for that, again, I think the innovation machine is very important to be able to deliver that kind of resilience here to avoid dependence. And that's why for me, in the longer term, the best way to guarantee our sovereignty and our autonomy here is to make sure that we have that innovation capacity here to continue to always switch sufficiently fast here. So technology sovereignty, and that means strong innovative power and invest in that.
The importance of innovation. Anyone else? Any final words? We're going to wrap it up on this question. If
maybe
not,
I can
Philip, yes, go for
from
it.
the Commission side on being less dependent and more autonomous. In the Critical Raw Materials Act, we have put some benchmarks up to 2030 that can be indicating here this dependency with the 10%, I think it was 10% of the dependency on locally produced raw material, then 40% of processing refining, and 15% on recycling. So these are kind of our currently benchmarks propose the Commission of measuring this, but of course if we manage to succeed going further with this, then even better. But just shortly replying to this point here.
Is there any, Daniel, is there any specific things you're watching out for in these negotiations that are currently ongoing?
Well, I think the negotiations are going quite good and quite fast. I think currently looks good and optimistic. I think I will not comment on the details, but we're looking forward for having this adopted as soon as possible and move forward with the implementation, because I was mentioned we need to accelerate all our activities. So the sooner we start the implementation phase, the sooner we will reach to specific investments or improving the situation in sourcing.
Okay, that's great. So it's time to act. Well, I think with that, we're just going to wrap it up. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the panelists for being here. And we are going to have some concluding remarks right now. So thanks again for your time.
So, we're going towards the end of the high level. Oh, this is magnetic, I feel. Yes, it is. The end of the conference, and I'm given the privilege to give some summary of what you heard today. And I hope you have got a lot of background information about the state of these issues on the energy and climate. And that's been provided by several of the speakers. I also heard endorsement of the reports which we have launched today. I listened in on the JRC, which was referring to these gaps which have been magically improved in terms of how many technologies we have already in the marketplace now compared to 2 years ago, like the 35%, which used to be 50%. But I think that's, it's a kind of dangerous message as well, as if there was not need to boost research and innovation to reach those targets. I mean, even though some technologies are in the market, we know about them, there's a huge gap to make them actually work. And we've seen that time on time over, that some of these technologies, they need a lot of support to make them actually work. And some of this work is really low TRL type of problems which emerge. And some of the fundamental research, you cannot really categorize by using TRL. There are applications which need to be solved. For instance, if there is a material problem with the wind turbine blades and so forth, to solve that, you need to go to really fundamental research to make that technology which is in the market work in the way it's intended to do. We had strong messages, and which rests upon the limits to growth and the planetary boundaries, which now has become a framework that we know about, and which is very sensible in terms of looking at how we are faring. And we know that we are bad in 5 out of the 7 planetary boundaries. And I also reflect about, I didn't include that in my presentation today, the energy trilemma, which is the kind of balance between competitiveness, nature, and climate, and how this balance all the time, how we are working with that, with the security of supply as the cornerstone, and how we are all the time discussing about this. I think since von der Leyen, and even strengthened by, I would say, the advents in Ukraine, and the kind of routine, almost routinely blowing up of gas pipelines now, that you see that is more drive towards the green technologies because it's driven by need to have. The demand reduction, yes, we have seen some effects on this, also driven by the war and the gas pipelines, which I was alluding to. And what I didn't hear anything about was this social cost of CO2 emissions. I think that is a really important issue to bring up here as well, because when we're talking about it's more expensive and so forth, yes, you may say so, but for who? And we've seen these numbers on social cost of carbon has really increased over the years. In the US, the EPA had a number of some $41 per ton pre-Trump. It was reduced by miraculous ways to $5 under Trump, and now it's on to 53 or something, whereas the EPA says it should be 150. And then you're closing in, I mean, then you're kind of finding the trade-off with the ETS and what is the real price which it should have been. The user-centric policy and methods, I think I found it really interesting, the discussion there, and that we need to think about the people. I mean, for industry, you can see this demand and efficiency is happening because of competitiveness, whereas people on an individual basis, they act and think differently. To understand this and to have a user-centric policy and systems, I think that's really important, and that was alluded to in this panel. And we also learned how Ellen Cray is dealing with cumbersome plugs and sockets. Now we were moving on to the raw materials part, and where I heard from the Commission that the role of research and innovation is extremely important. We know the substitution and recycling. I've been reminded many times about this substitution thing, that we should have been much more vigilant on that previously, not to end up with new dependencies. And the total footprint is important, so looking at the whole value chain. And I was told during one of the breaks here, about the possibility we have for having mining practices with really low footprint using co-benefits from, for instance, geothermal energy. This is also something we need to take into account. And then time and speed of essence, yes, and then we complicate things, what is making a real accelerator and not. And there was the alluding to the connection of national strategies and EU strategies, and I do agree that here the countries, the member states, and the associated countries, I could add to that, really need to cater for a lot of the fundamental activities and materials, whereas at the EU level, we really need to pick and to amalgate this to a pan-European force, tour de force kind of raw materials. From the battery, I was also, from Philip, I heard about these new materials for batteries, like I was alluding to the sodium ion batteries. But I also think that, maybe the highest efficiency is not the ultimate target for all of this, if it can also create more on the strategic autonomy. The circular approach, I mean, it's often I think about this for raw materials, that it's almost like an indefinite demand for this, but it's not, of course. I mean, for fossil fuels, you could go on forever, and it's a linear kind of value chain, but for materials, you have circular value chains, meaning that at some time you would actually have enough, especially if you go to full recycling, although there are some limitations, theoretical limitations to that as well. The multifaceted objectives of biodiversity, land use and climate, and shifting all dependencies for new dependencies, these are true dilemmas that we need to cater for. And this is also part of the activities and the target for ERA, of course. Then we entered into the classical discussion about this picking winners or being technology neutral. It's one where you will not find this is the way we will go. The European way of doing this is usually to be much more picking solutions than the American way. But it also has its benefits, I think. Thinking about, for instance, the regulations on cars in the US on emissions, which was just talking about what was the concentration of nitrous oxide in the flue gases and unburnt hydrocarbon, which ended up with air pumps in the flue gas manifolds of the cars rather than doing catalyst. So I think it's that sometimes you get imperfections like that. I'm not saying do that or do that, but I think with the NZIA and the strategic net zero technologies, we have a quite broad approach to it. It's not like this technology will solve it. We're not at this point in history now where we can say we'll do only that and that will solve everything. We're now in a position where we really need to harvest the benefits where we can find them. And the issue behind this, of course, is the deglobalization, which is really making it really difficult to provide the raw materials and the critical raw materials for multifaceted use, really difficult. And in essence, trade is the carrying beam of our economies. So how could the innovation machine make this more feasible and lessen the impact of the deglobalization? That's an interesting topic, I think. Other than that, which is a lot, I think, we have understood that the set plan revamp report will come out this week. We are eagerly waiting on that. We're given some input to that on a constant basis, I would say. And I also read during the conference that the EU has agreed on the position before the COP28 to a compromise which says to phase out unabated use of fossil fuels, so not to phase out fossil fuels. So there is, we have a joint program, CCS, which I guess still have activities to undertake to contribute to that wording before the meeting in Dubai. So it's clear that we need research and innovation to close the gap to the largest extent possible and to see to that zero or nothing is possible. Thank you, and now I invite you for lunch here.